not going to make any decisions tonight. That's number one. Number two, I want you to know that we have a very short timeline. We ultimately, on September 12th, must deliver a long-term space plan to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. So we're going to, later on, we're going to work back from that, and you'll hear what the timelines for the meetings are. But that's the drop-dead date. We have to deliver at that time. Just a reminder that we're waiting for a key piece of information which will come to us on or about July 24th, which is a consultant's report on the question as to what can be done at our other existing schools. So with that, I'd like to start, and we have a huge amount to go through. We're very glad to have you here. I'm hoping at the end that I'll be able to have somebody give me a T-shirt of both that have been created for this, because I think it's going to be part of my legacy. Other than that, I would ask you to bear with us while we go through the material that we have to go through. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Madam Chairman, do you want to do the minutes?
Yes, I would find my voice here. The minutes are on the reverse, members of the committee, of the agenda. So if you turn it over and take a look, see if you have any corrections or additions.
Looks good to me.
I'm willing to move the minutes as shown.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed or abstentions? All right, we've approved the minutes.
Great. So Dr. Tsao, you're on. And we have a deadline. Dr. Tsao has a deadline of 8 p.m., 8 o'clock this evening, so we want to make sure to get through her agenda.
All right, thank you, Alan. So for you guys in the committee, what we are going to do today is we're going to go through 5 different steps of the choosing by advantages method of decision making. The first step is we're going to work on identifying the must criteria. What must all alternatives achieve in order to be considered for this decision? After we identify the must criteria, we're going to review a list of alternatives and see if that must criteria eliminates from consideration any of those alternatives from the get-go. Then we're going to review our criteria. Some members have been refining our criteria, and we need to first re-rank them, and then re-weight them. For instance, identify which one is 100, and then how do they all weigh in proportion to that paramount advantage. And then we are then going to check our latest version of the Choosing by Advantages study and determine how is our logic behind why we would assess there are certain advantages for one alternative versus another. And finally, we'll be applying the numbers that we developed today into that latest version of our analysis. So there might be a break of about 5 to 10 minutes or so between step 4 and step 5, because I need to spend time of copying, pasting, and applying those numbers in, and so everybody could have a quick bathroom break during that time. Okay? So this right here is a list of us starting to develop what we define it as the must criteria for each of the alternatives. It will help us hopefully start to help eliminate some of the options off the table. And I've sort of combined a group of feedback from a number of committee members. And I wanted you guys to look at them and sort of identify as a group what would you agree should be the must criteria? What must each alternative achieve for this project?
And these aren't in any priority order.
They're not in any order. They're
Right.
just in order of emails I got and assembling them.
And what are the little letters on the left?
Those are initials of committee members who had contributed to it, and some other committee members had also told me over the phone, and it was just a repeat of them, so I didn't catch that as accurately. But here are some of the criteria. So are there any criteria that really stands out, that is important for this project to meet?
Number one,
Neil?
number one,
Okay? So it must meet the enrollment need,
right, that's why we're here.
right? Okay? So I'm gonna just put that in bold for now.
Not just the need, but the date too, by a certain date. There's two issues.
Okay? So does that capture that must criteria? Any project alternative must meet that criteria. Any others?
It's a small quibble, but the high school peaks at 2022, I believe, not 2018.
2022. Okay,
Number seven.
right here,
Yeah,
okay?
that's number 2.
So there's a probability of successful approval by Brookline community, the town meeting, and override vote. There's also criteria down here that was split up as must have at least a 50% override vote approval and must have at least a 2/3 majority of town meeting to get bonding approval. Do you guys want to break that out, or do you just want,
I think it's all the same.
okay?
Yeah, it rolls together.
All right, so I'm gonna put this as gray, just so that we can start graying it out, okay?
Fourteen is essentially included.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that in gray.
I'm going to suggest number 3 is a must.
I actually like to take issue with that.
Okay?
If you look at the consequences of not getting MSBA funding, it makes, if you assume that we can get funding for anything, I believe that we would end up having to spend about 12% more of our own, that is, the total override would be somewhere between 12 and 15% higher. Because the preponderance of what we need in an override is actually operating expense, not long-term bonds. And therefore, I would not put that one up as high.
Let me throw out another take on that, is what if we go with a hybrid solution, where a portion of the solution is MSBA eligible and a portion isn't? Just because a portion that is not MSBA eligible, should that eliminate that option completely?
I would not disagree with that, but I also believe that there are some options that, for example, if there is to be a new school for any purpose of any grade grouping, it probably must be MSBA eligible. So-
Yeah, I think,
I think I would not consider that there is an equal trade-off on that.
I think that as a practical matter, the trade-off is going to be doing something either that is MSBA fundable, like a new school, and which will be a single, very large expenditure, or multiple additions, which may or may not be MSBA fundable and, or partially MSBA fundable. So, a new school, yeah, absolutely, it would be foolish not to design a school and so forth so that it could be funded. But I wouldn't want to stop there. I'd like to, I would suggest.
Well, you could think of a different way of putting it, but I certainly would not want us to have, or to lose,
Yeah.
the option of a 40% match.
So I have a suggestion as to how we might deal with it. First of all, we could take the operating funds off the table because that's not an MSBA
Yeah, we're not
issue.
actually making a recommendation for that in any case. We're just
So-
talking about facilities.
Right, so we're talking about facilities, and we're really talking about, would we absolutely need to have MSBA approval and standards for any large, and I haven't defined that yet, any large capital expenditure, such as the building of a new school, either high school or K through 8 on the one hand, or the work on the Brookline High School in order to bring it up to 2,500. So it seems to me, I haven't gotten there yet, but it seems to me that we could say that if we can't get MSBA approval and meet MSBA standards for major, that not having been defined yet, capital improvements, that would be a showstopper. How do people feel about that?
Well, there's two issues there, meeting MSBA standards and then getting MSBA funding.
Well, it says standards for funding.
So what if in a worst-case scenario, we meet the standards and for some reason there aren't funds available or the funding mechanism through MSBA won't meet our timeline? Then where are we?
Are you suggesting that it's okay to go forward with recommendations that might or might not be eligible for a 40% reimbursement?
No,
Then-
I'm suggesting that we plan for meeting their standards. We try to get reimbursement, but then we have to, if for some reason the reimbursement isn't available, we're gonna have to make a decision.
We're not even going to be considering at that time, there will be other steps. All we're trying to do is come up with a recommendation that will go to the school committee that will meet a set of criteria that will certainly be subject to further review, not just by the school committee, but also by the override study committee. The point here was to be careful not to make a proposal with a recommendation that would not be eligible for MSBA funding, and I don't know how you want to say that.
If you decide, though, I mean, based upon Michael's point, that you should consider alternatives that may or may not achieve the MSBA standards, then what you can do is not include it as part of the must criteria, but it can spill out as you do the analysis later on. You can put the importance for getting MSBA funding as very high.
Right.
But that allows you to still consider alternatives that may not meet MSBA funding.
Yeah, that's my point. I'm not saying throw it out.
Yeah.
I'm saying it wasn't one of my top priorities for the reasons that I explained.
Do other members of the committee agree with Michael's point?
I agree with Michael's point, too.
Okay, so I will for now put this in gray. Are there any other must criteria?
Yeah, I think 4 combined with 13 and 15 is also a must.
I'm gonna highlight them right now.
Could someone read them, because for some of us that can't see where we sit?
4 says probability, and it probably should say probable to meet or exceed current educational program, parentheses, including achieving required student-teacher ratio and class size. 13 says must maintain Brookline's reputation for educational excellence. And 15 says meeting or exceeding current educational program. You're welcome.
So I think that, if we start getting specific, I don't object to the teacher ratio and the class size thing, but there are a lot of other specifics at this point that we might want to include in there. My choice would be just to take out all those specifics and make a general statement that it has to meet or exceed our current educational program,
For simplicity,
and leave it at that. and not begin to get into the weeds about.
Should I,
Well, you can gray out the number 4 and leave in whatever it is, I can't see the number, 15?
Yeah,
meeting or exceeding current educational
Yeah.
program
Yeah.
and keep, I will gray out 4,
Because otherwise it's the same.
right.
okay?
And-
And what about number 13 and
Well, hold
15?
on, Mel.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I don't object to the criterion. I mean, how could anybody object to that? But I'm wondering, what scenario would we not do that? I mean, it seems implicit that we would.
Stating the obvious, you're right, but.
Well, we did have the discussion about 8-9, for example, and the superintendent made it very clear that his view is that that puts the model and the educational excellence the model provides at risk. And a great many people, I mean, we don't have pink shirts suggesting that we, keep the K through 8 model, but just the same, that's the general tenor of the input that we've had back from the public, and I think from the school department.
Right, there was a grade 6 suggestion for a while too, and that was the conclusion. But you're right, none of those alternatives
Yeah, well, they were off
have
the
made our
table.
final,
Yeah, so-
our final grid either, so.
And it also, in a way, is a message to the override study committee, which legitimately is going to examine several of those assumptions.
What about any of the other criteria that remain up there? The number 5, probability of producing districts which are optimally diverse and relatively equivalent to other districts in profile, for example, in terms of,
Yeah.
Well, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, we did, in a sense.
Part of the charge.
okay?
Yeah, and we
Is
had it
that
previously
a
as well.
must-have,
Yeah,
or
I think it's very important, but not
That's a nice to
necessarily a
have.
must.
Yeah. That goes with the MSBA, maybe somewhere in that, it's something we want to keep on a second
Sure.
tier.
Okay. So
at least,
is everybody
I-
fine with, we're going to be, of course, evaluating against it, but we won't have it as a must criteria, because if you're going to say a must, there might be a threshold that we need to define of what that must means, for instance, and then it'll be very hard for you to assess each alternative to that.
So another way to look at that is that we probably don't have an ideal, diverse set of schools today. So maybe what we should, maybe what we need to say is that we don't want it to be less diverse. And would that be a must criteria?
It's high up, it's part of our charge, whether it's a must or not.
Yeah, I don't want to carry the cudgel here anymore. The cudgel anymore, but I don't
Say that,
So
Michael.
did you have a
Michael?
point? Lisa?
I think that we should not lessen it, but I don't see it as a must.
It's not the
Right.
same level as, say, number 1.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to put it in gray, but then you guys can reflect that in when you start weighting your criteria later on. It
Michael?
doesn't preclude, it doesn't eliminate an option, basically.
Does it work to put it in a color that separates it from the gray
Yeah,
along
so
with
we
the
can-
MSBA so that those two are, we know that,
Sure.
we're not
I'll put
dropping
them in
those out
another
and combining
color.
with something else.
I think that's helpful.
Okay?
The only other one that I think might be a must is 6, and
Well, that's
it's
really
open to
that's a
discussion.
corollary to number 1,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah,
I think so, too.
I agree.
Okay. What would you say would be easier for you to assess an alternative as? The probability of site availability?
Well,
I think they're two separate concepts myself.
okay.
All right. But it's a
But
must.
but it is a must, right?
I
Oh,
think,
it's a
I think it is a must. I mean, and I think that addresses, a lot of suggestions that have been made for sites that just aren't going to be for sale, for example, or that are impractical to take by eminent domain.
So I'm going to put in must have site available, for instance. We can adjust that rewording to the others as well, but that's important for your, and I also have minimizing transitions and opportunity for innovation.
Minimizing transitions is probably similar to 2.
No,
ability to?
Oh, no.
No.
Maybe not, no.
No, and
sorry.
minimized transitions is something we're interested in, but there again, I don't think it's a must.
I agree, yeah, I was gonna say that.
We will try and minimize it based on the options that we end up with, but I don't think it's a must in the same way. 'Cause-
Okay. So is it okay with the group if I put it as green?
Actually, I would put it as gray, but that's me. But I would drop it out, but okay.
Okay.
But do whatever.
Opportunity for innovation, does that fall in the same category?
It's gray.
Optional, preferred.
How about percent of students within a mile, or half mile for that matter?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's really the walkability neighborhood school
Yeah.
concept.
If that wasn't important to us, we would all say, let's go to Baldwin School and we go home.
Right.
No, that's a little different.
So maybe,
Different. Baldwin School will not be that walkable to people who go there.
That's what I'm saying. If that's not important to us, then we would just say, let's go to Baldwin.
No, but Baldwin, okay, but Baldwin is being excluded for other reasons besides that.
Yeah.
Perhaps,
Total
but
redistricting.
Yeah.
Right, but then you're
it's the same
back
thing,
to
though. The redistricting is.
redistricting.
The proximity 10 years from now has nothing to do with the.
That's true.
Yeah, so, yeah.
okay, so what you might want to do is, again, this is not the final analysis that we're doing. We're getting closer to the final analysis. After you go through this, maybe some members later on might try to figure out a better way of rephrasing this must criteria. I don't know if you want to define there as a minimum percent of students that you want, for instance. A minimum has to be at least 25% of students within 1 mile, for instance. I don't know what standard you guys would like to have.
I think this is not the time to set that standard, and so I agree with you. I think that should be a must, but I don't think at the present time we can set that standard.
Right, so I'm going to leave it as white, because you have to still work on it. And
Right.
then the last one is I have ability to distribute redistricting across districts as equitably as possible.
I'd say that's one down.
So I think that's equivalent to number 5, I agree.
So green?
Green.
All right, so what I'm,
I'll note for number 10, I've got, right around 4:30, I got data that I can start computing
okay,
for the different scenarios.
all right, and we'll
So we'll
put
be
that
able
in
to
when we go into
Thank
that
Well,
analysis.
given that could we make that one green because we want to think about it as an important thing, but we need more information?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I
really
sort of feel like it
yeah.
fits into the other green ones.
It's really a proxy for neighborhood,
Yeah,
neighborhood structure.
Yep, yep.
And then I'm gonna put, a note here that Neil, will, help us with that.
And I'll also note that under any scenario, the North Brookline school districts, for the most part, everybody's within a mile, even under Baldwin.
Okay,
And just for simplicity's sake, I'm wondering if we can't combine 13 and 15?
It's just a huge disruption.
Is that reasonable? I mean, they seemed
Yes.
Yeah, that was the intention.
so which one would we pick, 13 or 15?
15.
Add, just add for educational excellence, let's see, exceeding program, blah, 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 blah. And maintain, I
And
suppose.
I can also combine them.
Well, maybe that's the easy way to do it, because they certainly are.
Yeah, the reputation's not as much, as important as the, as the meeting the standard.
Right.
That's true.
Oh, it's both.
I'm gonna put this as a gray because I've now
Yeah.
incorporated.
Actually,
that.
maybe we could use a little less in the reputation. It would take the pressure off.
Right.
Get people to flee to Watertown.
I can't believe the chairman said that.
Tongue in cheek, tongue in cheek.
I'm just gonna put these criteria up on top. Okay. So you have defined that these are the must criteria for it must meet or exceed current educational program, it must maintain Brookline's reputation for educational excellence, must have a high probability of successful approval by the Brookline community in terms of the town meeting and override vote. It must have site availability, it must have the site available within the time frame and to very closely to meet the enrollment needs of 600 by 2017 and 600 by 2022. So keeping these in mind, these are the four. I'm going to abbreviate them, actually. I'll just write down as educational excellence, community,
Where's put approval at?
approval, site availability, and meet enrollment.
Solves the problem.
Okay?
Right.
So
And
those
what
are,
about 10 and 11?
I've copied them.
They're copied up
Oh,
above.
I'm
I
sorry.
copied them up above.
Okay,
So
sorry.
so educational excellence, community approval, site availability, and meet enrollment. And I'll put them up here. Okay. I'm going to adjust this.
Yeah.
I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, you can
Just
wrap
one
the
second.
text there if you want.
It should be.
So while you're fixing that up, Cynthia, let me just, for those of you who don't know on the committee, we do have some food for you and also some drink. So if you want to go and pick something up, you should do that.
Soft drinks.
Thank you for clarifying that,
So-
Selectman Waschinsky.
What I have up here are the must criteria up on top and the alternatives that are percolating outside. And at this point, I just wanted the committee to spend just a few moments to see, based upon your must criteria, are there any alternatives that naturally kind of fall off consideration because of the must criteria? So by definition, if an alternative cannot pass, does not achieve a must criteria, it makes sense for us to not consider it anymore.
I think we're going to have some here where there will be, need more information or, some other.
Sure.
Question mark.
And I can
Yeah.
note, and I can
Question
note
mark.
that. And I can note that, for instance. So I can make this larger print too. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is just a first pass. And after this meeting, I think some committee members can look at it more in-depthly and just double check, is it appropriate or not to eliminate certain ones from consideration. But this just makes sure that what we're going to do next, we're not considering an alternative that really cannot pass, literally pass muster, right? So are there any
I would
alternatives?
take Amory off of community approval, and it's not just a count of T-shirts, it's an idea that taking a public park and substantially enroll on it is just not going to pass town meeting, is just not going to pass. I mean,
it depends on the public park.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, we have a lot to go through.
I agree with you with regard to Amory not getting community approval, but we talk about Lynch, that's open space, it's a park. It depends on which park.
yeah,
And I absolutely take the point with regard to Amy, but I do want to keep in
That
mind that
mark.
almost any, if you're going to build a school by nature, it goes on open space.
Uncle, you're absolutely right. Let me redefine it. It's Amory Park. It is too
That's the part,
it is too pristine, it's too perfect the way it is. It's not gonna gain the support, and I'd like to take it off the table. I don't know why it was,
Old Lincoln should be taken off the table.
excuse me,
Pending approval.
excuse me.
We will,
No.
we will ask anyone who speaks up like that to leave, please.
I would also say, Mr. Chairman, that the Amory Park is in a floodplain. There are very few parts of Brookline that are in such a floodplain, and based on our site availability, I think that'd be a really major impediment, timeliness and otherwise.
I would also add that the odds of getting Article 97 approval through the legislature when it's controversial in the community is next to
Pretty low.
zero.
So I'm not clear what we want to do here. Cynthia, should we just simply check community approval over there and assume no, or say no, put no in that column?
I was going to mark X's if there are any that you feel that there are likelihood of one of these alternatives not meeting a must criteria.
Okay,
And we
then
can
sounds
step
like,
back and take a look at it. There is, the Amory Park is an option, but the northeast site is also another option. It's like
Right,
in the northeast area, but it's not specifically at Amory Park, for instance.
so it would be, then you would,
So I can put an X in community approval for Amory Park, for
Right.
instance,
And site availability.
and site availability.
right.
Okay? Are there any other sites? Any other alternatives?
Yeah, I think there's a few we could hit. Town hall swap. Site availability.
Right.
I mean, it's just
Same
not-
would be true for the public health building.
Probably true for
Probably Parsons.
feel-
Right.
and the BU properties.
Well, we don't
No,
know.
no, let's hold off on BU.
Yeah.
Hold off on BU.
Yeah.
Lynch is a question mark, or is it? Have we decided that we're going to take town council's advice on that?
Well, there are enough, if having wetland and other concerns are enough to hold the site hostage, so to speak, to procedures that would not meet the time frame, then Lynch is off.
So I'm gonna mark X under Lynch.
Yep.
I'm not so sure about that.
I'm not sure about that either.
All right,
Okay, remove the X then.
well, I'll put a question mark there perhaps.
Put a question mark?
Yep.
Okay.
The same question mark would be you. I mean, putting together any kind of deal like that
Sure.
would take a very long time.
So what do we need to remove the question mark from Lynch? So what-
Apparently, committee belief that there are sufficient constraints that it's not viable.
So what do we need to get us through a process where we can decide?
I guess my question would be to Ken, why is it that you feel differently about Lynch compared to Amory?
It's purely a subjective judgment on my behalf, but
Okay,
I
but
think
we've been told that there are complicated issues there.
there are complicated issues, and as I've said before, those issues are not necessarily insurmountable.
Within the time frame.
And nobody knows that. And I'm not advocating for Lynch. I just think that there's still a possibility that Lynch could work. If that, in other words, if there's nothing else that we can figure out to do, we might have to go back to Lynch. I don't want to eliminate it now.
Will we know well enough that Lynch is feasible? Will we know in time to make our position clear to MSBA that Lynch is, that, you know what I'm talking about. Will we know by September 12th, yes or no on Lynch? Because if we don't know at all, if the question mark can't be erased, then it may as well be an X.
Look, I guess that's where I'm coming from. I was persuaded by the analysis from town council that it has so many problems that it would be, in a way, again, held hostage to various regulatory processes, including the issue of it being also in a floodplain, same as Amory.
Why don't you let's take one more bite at the apple and see what happens with that one.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it as a question mark.
Yep.
And it's for somebody to sort it out and find out if it really should be eliminated from consideration. Okay?
Let's go to an easy one. Coolidge Corner Center Street parking lot, site availability, X.
Yeah. Doesn't work.
And that would be the reason of the businesses, or,
Amongst hundreds of other things.
Well,
well, some of the hundreds, give me two. Businesses?
Disruption to business.
disruption of business.
Yeah,
It's
businesses.
a bad place for a school.
That's what I was.
Okay.
Bad place for a school. Another easy one, 7, neighborhood schools expansion, meet enrollment is a question mark. We simply don't.
Yeah, we'll know that, hopefully we'll know that.
But I think that's
Yeah.
one definitely where we should get more information.
Right.
That's one where we hope we'll have answers
From whom?
from our consultants, HMFH.
Okay,
Concept school, meet enrollment, I would eliminate it. Because-
Probably, I would agree, yeah.
I don't think I'd agree with that yet.
Question mark?
concept school,
Yeah.
in terms of meeting enrollment, I'll leave it as a question mark right now, because we don't have the data to confirm what the enrollment will be.
I don't think we're going to have.
And you may
the
not
data
know
on
in
it.
time.
No, right.
Cynthia, can we go back and, can we make some simple statement by each of the X's as why, like you've said, floodplain
Sure,
for Amory,
okay.
Immediate approval is obvious.
the town hall and swap, I'd like to have, we just have to document this because people,
Sure.
I think the public. are
And what
going-
is the reason for a town hall?
Yeah.
Not available.
It's also a bad location, too.
Yeah, it's not a good, it's so close to Pierce. We could throw a stone at it, even I could throw a stone at it.
And then the public health building would be the same?
Yes.
You have the same issue as you have with splitting as you do.
Talk about swapping the Pierce with it, but
Okay. So any other ones that stand out?
Eminent domain options.
Okay. And that would be due to sign availability?
Yes.
Okay.
I would,
And the reason
we
being
don't-
would be
time.
Time and maybe cost.
What is
Okay.
Boston PS options?
Well, there is a school at 50 St. Mary Street, and I don't think we know anything about it.
It's not occupied.
I believe it is occupied.
They might have other ideas.
There's one on Corey Road as well.
Yeah, it's occupied too.
Is it? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So maybe we just say X there, not available.
Do you know for sure, though?
It would require probably a formal request to the Boston School Department.
Then I
If you
would
really
put a-
want to have an answer there, put a question
I would
mark.
put a question mark there. Okay. Then we have any other options down here?
Worthington Road's.
You've got a
occupied.
duplicate, I think. Worthington Road is the same as above,
Okay, so I'm gonna,
Multi-site expansion.
is also the same as above, I think.
and I'm gonna delete this one,
Yeah.
okay?
School with 1 grade, school with 2 grades, I would put it, at the very least, a question mark under educational excellence, if not.
Okay, all right,
That's been pretty.
And that would be true of the 8-9 as well then.
okay. All right. So, I just wanted to spend a few moments on this because now you can understand why your must criteria, the list of must criteria is important, because it will help you sort of filter out and sort of think about what are the must criteria that each alternative must have. And if any of the options that you're considering fails to achieve any of the must criteria, then it's probably appropriate not to consider it.
There's one more duplicate up there, I think. If you
Okay.
go back down, all the way, I need to see the bottom, but early ed, pre-K, multi-site is
Yep.
probably the same as combined K into BEEP.
Yeah.
So could I ask you a question about how that would work and why that would solve the enrollment problem?
Sure, it would subtract 28 classrooms from K through 8 buildings,
Or where would you put them?
somewhere else.
You're rearranging,
That,
rearranging,
that's,
we're
that,
playing musical chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
that's in a way in the same category as Worthington Road, because we know where to make a quick inquiry to find out whether that's feasible.
In fairness, there is the possibility, which was being discussed by the school department, of some sort of early education partnership, including Wheelock College and Pine Manor, and it would be worth exploring and not to take off the possible list as,
And that's something we could do, we think we could do in a short period of time.
All right,
As a committee, I would suggest that you do have homework in terms of defining and double-checking your must criteria and refining it if necessary after you've now gone through this exercise a little bit and thinking about applying it to all these lists as alternatives and any alternatives that may emerge afterwards. There may be other alternatives that can emerge that people can provide data for you.
I
But you
have
need
to ask one final question here, since
Sure.
we seem to have not eliminated Old Lincoln under community approval, which it seems to me is as strong as the opposition to Amory Park.
I can put that in there.
How do other people feel about that?
I disagree with that.
I
because
disagree
you
with
have-
it also.
You have 88, what is it, 18% of population in Brookline send their kids to public schools? 17%, okay. So that means 83% don't send their kids to schools. And if I were one of the 83%, I would say, we have an enrollment problem, we have a surplus school, why aren't we using it? So to eliminate it early on, I think, is a mistake.
I agree.
I agree. I also want to point out, Old Lincoln School's been on the table here since the very beginning, and there's been various times when we've been going in that direction and various times where we've heard reasons not to. Amory, I've never heard a single member of this committee propose Amory Park as a solution. That's a solution that came from an outside source. I'm glad they proposed it. It was a valuable exercise to think about it, but I haven't heard a single member of this committee ever propose Amory Park as a solution. I have heard them propose Old Lincoln School.
How about a question mark?
That's probably more appropriate than an X.
It is clear there is a community opposal to it, but there is
I
a,
think there will be community opposition and support for every one of these
Everything.
things.
right.
If you build a school at Baldwin, you'll have people from Heath opposing it because everyone from Heath will then have to go to the new Baldwin school.
Right.
So community opposition is a fungible thing, you know.
Right, but
It's-
this is why we start identifying the must criteria. So in the case of Amory, for instance, you also have this floodplain issue, which is, it starts increasing the, you know,
The nature,
risks.
The nature of the issue with Old Lincoln is different than Amory, because Amory attracts not just people who, Old Lincoln is, the opposition is centered on a group of parents who don't want their kids to go to school on Route 9, and that's a valid point. But that's where it's centered. The opposition to Amory is much broader.
but I'll just leave it there for now. I mean, I think as a committee, it would be appropriate to review and revisit your must criteria. Review and revisit how you fill in this chart, and it should be a part of your report.
Yep.
Okay.
Cynthia, just a couple of things. First of all, because we're just talking about Old Lincoln, the people from Old Lincoln did leave a sheet of paper with which it's a petition, which they'd ask us to take a look at. The petition is here, so I just want everybody to know that. And secondly, isn't there on that list a public-private partnership alternative?
Yeah, it's down there, right.
I don't really think I understand that.
It was one of the things that came in an email
The-
or
the-
in a suggestion here. here.
Yeah, the only thing I can say about it is to go back to the, well, and I don't know whether it's public-private, it is a partnership, the Early Education Center with Wheelock and Pine Manor. I don't know that that's public-private, but it is some sort of partnership.
As I understand that, the idea behind that was partnering with the developer,
Oh,
building
oh, okay,
combination, school on some floor levels, office building, or other
Ah,
commercial space.
got it.
And by doing that, being able to better afford and so on and so forth.
So
So
is
for
there
that
a
option, may I suggest that, why don't you guys get actually a very concrete suggestion, like a specific site and a specific developer before you consider that option? I mean, unless you have those two in place, then you're not considering something specific enough.
So, my question to you, Cynthia, is the next activity going to incorporate those alternatives that we have not eliminated? Or are we going back to the other
We're going back-
earlier ones, some of which may or may not be on our must list?
The next step would be to go back to our earlier list and double check that list against the list that we have now started to flesh out and see if there are some alternatives that we should not consider anymore.
Could you just scroll down and make sure we've covered
Yep.
all the, there we go, okay.
Which one?
15 and 24.
15 and 24.
Right,
Oh, okay.
so you just take that one out.
24
delete.
says it better.
Okay.
So that should have some question of site availability.
Okay.
Question mark, yep.
And public-private partnership should have a question mark, at the very least it says time and cost, or time anyway.
We don't have a proposal.
We don't. But anyway.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next chart. The next chart we're working on is a number of members have started looking at the different criteria that we have in front of us. And this is, we had on July 1st identified a set of criteria based upon the factors that we felt were important. And now that we have all of these right here, I would like us to first, we're going to work on ranking. That means what do we think is the most important, and I will just, put, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 20 in terms of ranking order. And after we do that, we're going to define how we weight it. But first, and I can read it out loud to you guys, just so you guys can make sure to hear.
I'm wondering if it would not help us, and I don't know if this is easy for you to do, because I know you've got a single spreadsheet with a number of different
Right.
sheets. But frankly, I would want us to take the must criteria and apply them to this list without any
Certainly.
discussion, because
So I
we've
can
already
go right
done that.
here to the must criteria. You have 4 of them, right? So this is the educational. So I'll mark it up right here. The educational is excellence is marked in this one right here.
Yeah, the top
I'll just write M's right now as to help you indicate that those are must for now. So probability of meeting or exceeding current educational program. Okay? Then town Brookline community approval. It's right here.
16,
Put that right there.
site availability.
And then enrollment need.
Right.
So site availability is. And enrollment, it's right here. So, I guess one charge is to first say, of those 4, for instance, what would you say would be the top?
Enrollment need. Meeting the enrollment,
Meeting the enrollment.
Do you all agree on that?
yeah, that's why we're here.
Okay, so I'm gonna put that as number 1 then. Okay, what comes after that? Site availability,
It's like 9, you need to do 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
One's K-8, one's B high school.
Okay,
Right, but they're, right, they could both be one.
very good, thank you. And then I have probability of site availability, Brookline community, or meeting or exceeding current educational program. What would you think would be the next most important?
I would take an educational program.
If it's not available, it's, what's the point?
Well, these are all musts in a sense. It
Yeah,
doesn't
right,
matter
I think
what
they're
the
all
program is
ones.
like there.
Can we just call them all ones and not debate whether they're 1, 2, 3, or 4?
It's up to you guys to decide that. If you want to,
Well, if we said
Find
they're
it that
must,
way.
I don't see how you can have must 1, must 2, must 3. It's going to be must or nothing,
Good point, Jen.
it'll
I
be up
agree
to
with
you guys to decide.
all ones.
I agree with Betsy.
Do you guys agree on that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Overwhelming vote by the selectmen.
All right.
Right,
So
there's
I
3
have
of
them all as 1 in terms of ranking order. So now that we have a few of these, that's the most important, what you feel is must criteria, what would you define it as sort of second most important? Now I can start reading out loud to you these criteria, or if you can, I can put it at like 150%. So you
Cynthia,
can
can we
read them a
take the
little better.
greens from the earlier exercise?
Yeah,
Sorry?
if we just transfer from our prior activity, the green ones are going to be high, right?
Very good, thank you.
So you've got 3
So-
more, 4 more there.
So ability to distribute redistricting across districts.
Just go back to that, maybe we can work on that list and, because we can see all of those and
Sure.
figure them out. Yeah. There are only 5 of them there, we should be able to figure them out.
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How would you order these? So we would start with number 2 through 6.
7, 6. 7 would be the top of those, 6 would be the second to those. 9.
7 would be the top, and then what would you say?
He's saying 6 is number 3.
3?
But you know
If-
what?
if we're
I
doing
mean,
these in
this
order.
fine grain ranking, I think each one of us would have a different ranking.
Yeah, I would
on-
put-
on
I
the
would
fine-
put
I mean,
them
to put them in a category makes a lot of sense. To fine grain.
Of
ranking-
course, each of you guys would have your own opinion as to what the ranking is.
Right.
But you, as a group, need to make a recommendation to the school committee. So as a group, you guys need to sort out, as a group, what would you agree as what you believe, for the most part,
So
will
what if
be
these
the
are all
ranking.
second tiered?
Or maybe these are all 2s.
For me not to disrupt this process, but, sometimes a group of criteria are equal. And I'm willing to say the group
Yeah,
of
they can
3
be.
criteria are equal.
They certainly can
So
be.
the greens are all 2s. Is that okay, George?
Well, to some extent, we arrived at them, some of them being green because we disagreed that some of us thought they were must and some of us thought they weren't.
I would caution you guys between putting them all as 2s.
Yeah, I think.
I
it's
think
a
you should
mistake.
look at them and sort of
I
see if
would
there's some
say
level
that
of gradation.
The MSBA is 2, and then the others are 3.
Well, I think minimizing transitions might be a 4.
Yeah, and I realize that I've been appointed by the advisory committee, the finance committee of the town, and I'm saying something that's,
You're gonna get hung.
violating all the rules, but I'm saying MSBA is the bottom of that list, not at the top.
But it implies a set of standards.
Standards are one thing, where the money comes from is another.
On the other hand, you have never had to lead an override campaign, and I want to tell you that you better be able to justify every penny you ask people to pay in additional taxes. MSBA is important.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I accept the point, but ranking.
You don't have to agree, you can just think you disagree.
Yeah, I disagree.
You don't really disagree, you think you disagree. We have all been
Now, this is
married
for you
a
guys to
long time.
determine.
We know how to argue.
How are you guys going to determine the difference between each of these criteria? If you feel that they're equally weighted, then that's one thing. But if you feel that there is a gradation between each of these elements, these criteria, that gradation should be expressed.
So I'll stick my neck out again. Probability of producing districts which are optimally diverse, I would put that lower than the neighborhood school, the proximity of a percent of students within 1 mile. So let me just toss that out.
Yep.
So if I put,
Why wouldn't you? Come to Lincoln, we're
We're-
25% diverse.
Mr. Knight,
Not leaving.
okay, that's fine.
so
Our lawyers are well prepared for this.
do you want
be
to
ashamed of
put the
yourself.
criteria
Dare you?
as
Dare you?
4 or 5?
Back my neck, I got my head chopped off, okay?
So what's the question? Repeat the question,
So
please.
should this one be identified as a 4 or 5, for instance? And how does minimizing transitions fit in all that?
Yes.
I would like the diversity to be at least equal to distributing, redistricting as equitably as possible. I think it's another equity issue.
What do you guys think about that idea?
I think it's a 3.
Right. They actually end up accomplishing the same thing, in fact.
Okay. And then how does minimizing transitions fit?
That's lower.
So is it lower like 4, or is it equivalent to this percent of
No, it's
students?
lower than proximity.
Lower than proximity, yeah.
Okay. So maybe I might put proximity as a 4 and minimizing transitions as a 5.
Good.
Good.
For example. Okay?
Yep.
And then I'm going to translate this now into the, so I have 2 as MSBA standards for funding. Then 3 will be redistricting. So it's right here, 2. And then redistricting is
Where?
right here. 3. Then we have for 4 and 5. Another 3 is optimally diverse.
You just said it wasn't this high a rank, so we don't feel bad.
And then I have proximity of students and minimizing transitions, 4
Right.
and 5. So since we have actually 2 criteria, one within 0.5 miles and one within 1 mile, I'll put them both as 4.
Yeah. Although there is a difference.
And then, actually, there is a difference. Would you want to have them as equally, or one
Well,
would be more important than another?
Let me ask Selectman Waschinsky, is the .5 criteria one that we should retain?
Is it viable even?
I think 5 is where, .5 is where you're gonna start seeing differentiation. .1, your
What?
numbers are going to be roughly equivalent under all of the scenarios.
Yeah,
So
1 mile is a long way
in
from
this
any
town,
public school.
we're only 6.7 square miles.
Right.
So, so I don't know if proximity percentage is gonna tell the story. I haven't figured out what's gonna tell the story yet, but
Since this is, again, a work in progress, I'll leave it as 4s, but you guys recognize that you might need to be adjusting this
Yep.
or
Right.
figuring out how you're going to
Right, but
manage
what
this
I-
walkability.
The answer I get is, it is worthwhile to have some differentiation like that, for example, 1 mile is not the be-all to end-all.
If I could, when you draw the parking districts for each school, each one of the parking plans for the teachers at the school is set up to hopefully accommodate them within a 1/4 mile. If you get beyond a 1/4 mile, they overlap. So as a practical matter, at least in North Brookline, a 1/4 mile radius is about as far as you get currently away from a school before you bump into another, being within a 1/4 mile of another one.
So, I mean, we'll leave it up to, Neil and whatever other committee members are dealing with this to look at if it's a 1/4 mile, if it's a 1/2 mile, whatever it is, it needs to be somehow measured and recognized and put into your analysis and
and
your
what
report.
what we're striving at is the concept of a walkable school.
Right.
Right.
these percentages are kind of proxies for the concept.
Right, okay, and then I had 5 was to minimize transitions for students, is 5?
Right.
Okay. All right,
Now, I believe there's another one that seems quite close to being a duplicate, which is, now, wait a minute, changing schools across town. Isn't that the same as redistricting as equitably as possible?
this one right here, and what other one was it?
It's the one right below it. The one, well, that one and the one directly above it. Are they,
Two.
This one right here?
so are they sufficiently similar that they could be either combined, or are they not?
Those are the same.
I mean, if one's redundant, or they could be put
There-
together.
It's my understanding there were 2 elements. The percent of students that would not need to change schools across town, that is a metric that you guys can get from your GIS reports. And this is a sort of a different side of looking at that.
Okay.
And one thing I saw today, and I was looking at line 2, is the 3 scenarios, when you look at them in toto, in aggregate, the percentages are not that different. They range from 30 to 36% in terms of having to change schools. But so that's not the story. The story
Okay.
is the way the distribution is.
Got it.
Okay.
So that doesn't, so I think if you,
Well,
three
are
express.
they both threes, or is the other one, are they?
I think they're redundant, they're trying to express the same concept.
Okay, so you do
So
see them
I'll
as,
write as redundant with 3. Okay? I'll put that in
Good.
there.
Good.
Okay? So as a result, I'm going to put an X here.
fine.
Okay? I'm going to highlight the ones that you need to do still. Opportunity for innovation, opportunity for transportation convenience, opportunity for transportation safety, probability of continued availability of swing space, providing appropriate common recreational and administrative space, relieving sufficient space at existing K through 8s. Yeah, Michael?
Providing appropriate common recreation and administrative space is one of the things that MSBA will look at. So.
That's true. If it's eligible, it will
Yeah.
probably, that's,
It needs to be,
yeah.
yeah, which actually is one of the problems with expanding the existing sites, because you have to reconfigure more than just classroom.
So would you say that would be redundant with the MSBA?
No.
So how would you rank it?
Speaking for myself, I wouldn't say it's redundant with MSBA.
You would or you
No, I
wouldn't?
wouldn't, because MSBA, there are other issues, for example, modulars. MSBA doesn't normally finance modular.
Right.
But,
They
but
don't normally finance serial
that's
things.
true, but they might, and I would not
Yeah.
eliminate them from consideration.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that, I'm just trying to say that this is not redundant with MSBA, this is a piece of MSBA.
20 is redundant to 13, so you can just eliminate that.
20 is redundant to 13?
Yep.
Just eliminate, don't.
Okay.
Well, it's a technical point with MSBA, because you don't get an auditorium funded through MSBA.
What about recreational space? That's not incorporated in 20.
Well,
I would just add it into 13.
All right, just make it more.
20 is part of
Common space is the issue,
Common spaces, right.
whether, we're dividing
So-
it too finely is.
Shall I note that 20 is covered by 13?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
are we saying that a whole school auditorium is a requirement?
No, the question would be, given options, if you could have a whole school auditorium, it would be desirable, but we know that MSBA is not going to fund that.
So relieving sufficient space at existing K-8's 14, isn't that go with one of our musts of meeting the enrollment crisis? I mean, that's,
Sure.
is that a separate issue or not? It's the first time I've seen it, by the way. I don't know where it came from.
It was developed by Rebecca.
But isn't that the same as the number one we've got up there, enrollment needs? Same as, actually, we ranked it number one, but it is number 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
It equals 9
I
and
can
10.
say that this is redundant with 9 and 10. Okay?
Yeah, that's solving the problem.
Okay? What about what remains?
If we could look up at transportation, convenience, and safety, that's a tough choice. I would put safety above convenience personally, but I don't know how the rest of you feel. But that's really where,
Or are they really the same issue? I mean, is it,
Safety above convenience?
if it's convenient, is it going to be safe and vice versa?
well, the obvious example, the poster child for lack of safety, at least in many people's minds, is Old Lincoln.
But is it convenient? I mean, are you saying something different, or is it the same basic problem for each one?
Safety.
Can you think
can
of
make
something that,
convenient that isn't safe. You can make something safe that isn't convenient. If you go to Baldwin, it's not a particularly convenient place. You can make a very safe drop-off.
okay,
I think
They
that
are
this,
two separate.
I think the distinction between safety and convenient is appropriate. Can you guys decide
Which is which?
which is more important?
safety's more important.
Safety
Okay.
is,
And then if you want to consider safety, would it be appropriate for me to put as number 6 right now? As, I can put it as a 6 right now,
for the sake of.
and then see how everything else falls.
Yeah.
What about the other, how about opportunity for innovation? Availability of swing space,
Those are both lower,
administrative space?
that's higher.
Administrative space is higher, okay. So,
Common space.
probability of accommodating anticipated student population.
I just have a point. You said you think that innovation is lower, but how do our schools remain excellent if we do not innovate as we go forward?
So I don't think innovation is unimportant, and I'm glad it's a factor, but I think that to try to accommodate an innovative programming as part of what we're deciding here is not realistic.
But it's an interesting thing let's just extend that discussion a minute, because one of the concepts is a concept school.
Yep.
And that would presumably, it provides a couple of advantages. One is, it obviously gives us an opportunity for innovation. Another is it makes the location in the center of population less critical, because if it's an attractive place, you may draw people to commute to it.
And that's great, and I wish 4 months ago that, Dr. Lupini or the administration had come to us with a real concept, like, this is what we want to do,
Fair statement.
this is going to be an innovation, this is going to enhance our program. I think, given that it's 4 or 5 months later and we haven't heard that, I think we've got to minimize that as a criteria now. Not eliminate it. If something comes up, I'm the first to jump on board, but and I don't claim to know anything about what is or what is not a good innovation, but I think given that nothing's been proposed and touted, I think we need to make that a lesser criteria.
I actually, I'd like to go back to what Dr. Crossley said, because I think that the question of innovation is included in the number one statement that we made about educational program meeting or exceeding what we have. And I think, actually, I don't mean that we would eliminate the idea of innovation, but I don't think it's a criteria which is separate from that, because no matter what we decide, my view is that the administration is going to be looking for innovations inevitably, both technologically and non-technologically.
Would it be appropriate to say that number 4 is included in number 1?
Maybe we should say that.
And I would certainly second what Alan just said. I take it as a given. I think that Mike Sandman's right. If there were a concept school with a different educational program, then it would be a unique situation. But otherwise, it should be part of what we expect from our schools.
And I wasn't advocating for that as much as I said, I just wanted to extend the conversation to make sure we covered it.
Yeah.
Because very clearly, the superintendent is not very enthusiastic about the idea
Of what? About the idea of what?
of a concept.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Oh, okay.
And neither is, I mean, he's very interested in innovation.
Oh, no, but a concept school is
No,
not innovation. Yeah.
but if it can be implemented effectively.
Okay, so, how about, in the case of, for example, a concept school, if enrollment is voluntary, the probability of accommodating the anticipated student population. So this refers to if you have a concept school and not enough people decide to enroll in it. How does that factor into everything else?
That's one of the reasons why we didn't go forward with the concept school concept.
Right, now that concept school has been potentially eliminated, I don't think we need this criteria anymore.
Okay, so I'm gonna put an X here. I'm gonna put this as a gray. Okay, you have, 1, 2, 3 more to, work on. Continued availability of swing space, providing appropriate common recreational and administrative space, and transportation convenience.
Well, the swing space is really a financial issue because it impacts the cost of construction.
Well,
For future projects.
Yeah.
Not necessarily this.
No, for future.
we're going to forget to include that when we start doing the numbers, so, but I think it's a low priority, though.
I agree.
So right now I have, I'm up to number 6, it'll be 7, 8, so this will be 9. I'll put a 9 right there,
Bottom, down near the bottom.
okay? And then I have now 2 left to put a 7 and an 8, or I could make it as a 6 as well, or it could be just as important as some of these other ones. So opportunity for transportation convenience.
Is that meant to be access to good transportation or what? I'm not clear what that was intended to describe.
I believe so. Access to different modes of,
Was that it, or was it a matter of of not requiring kids to be taken to a school that's substantially distant from where they live? That was the sense that I had of it.
But Michael, you used that before when I was talking about combining them, but in the sense that you narrowed it to, not having to drive across town to drop your kid off, isn't that the same as the radius questions then?
Yeah, neighborhood school.
That's the radius question.
There's also the cost of busing, which factors in here.
Right. And as a practical matter, K through 8 kids, well, it's not true that K through 8 kids wouldn't take public transportation very often, but there's not much of a factor for K through
okay?
So
8. I think you're right.
we can eliminate it or combine it with,
Combine it with the other one, with the percentage.
With the
radius
proximity.
Proximity, yeah.
I'll just say redundant with 17 and 18.
Yep.
So then this leaves this, is probability of providing common recreational and administrative space, is that less important than safety?
give it a 6.
You think it's just as important as safety?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think actually you risk,
Right, I don't. Change my mind.
I think you risk the excellence of your educational program
Well,
if you don't have adequate common space.
I guess I'm going to argue it's even an equity issue, too. You don't want to have a school that has significantly less of any of these things.
So I could put it as a 3 to be just as important as equity.
Yeah.
What's 4?
4 is proximity, 4 is neighborhood school.
So for
But this is specific to facility.
appropriate common
Go with that.
recreational and administrative space,
I go with that, 3.
Three.
put a 3 right here,
Yep.
okay?
I think that's much better.
All right, and then as a result, this becomes a 7. Okay?
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to put this as no fill. No fill. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now is we're going to resort all of these criteria and from 1s all the way down to 10s, down to 7s, and then we're going to assign weights to them. So just hold on 1 second while I sort. Okay. So now that we have this set up, these will become 100. Because they are all must criteria, based upon what you guys assessed.
Except that 2 and 3 are with the musts, we combine them as a single must criterion. Are we duplicating? Because we're not really talking about the high school right at this stage, but do we keep those as 2 separate things?
Yeah,
Or are we double counting?
I think previously we had combined those.
Yeah. Or do we separate? I'm looking for guidance, really.
This is up to you guys to define if you want to keep it separate or if you want to combine them.
Combine them too.
So you want to combine this 2 and 3, probability of MSBA reimbursement.
No.
No, sorry, the enrollment need,
Lines 2 and 3.
lines,
Oh, lines 2 and 3, excuse me.
right, those two.
All right, so you want to combine these 2?
Yep.
Okay.
In a sense, you should put 600 K through 8s before 400 BHS.
I say this is overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, about the K through 8s.
Right.
That's the only high school mentioned in the whole thing, really.
But some of the solutions.
But some of the solutions would affect
That's true.
the possibility of that.
So we're combining it? Okay. All right. So now you have 4 criteria.
Yeah, that's what we had.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we've now sort of sorted out on column B, just sort of how ranking them. But now we're going to assign weights. So we have about just a few that we need to assign. A total of, I can tell you, about 9. 9 things that we need to assign. So for probability of MSBA reimbursement, would you say that it is half as important as those must criteria, 2/3 as important, or almost just as important, just not as important? So it could be like a 90, for instance. If it's half as important, we put a 50. We're now weighting these criteria.
I think it's an 80.
80.
So we'll put an 80 in.
The schools,
We'll go through this, and then after we go through it, one pass, we're gonna step back and see if that's the right for your group. What about ability to distribute redistricting across districts as equitably as possible? Is it almost just as important, or it's actually half as important?
I think it's an 80.
Do you guys, as a group, agree on that? Do you think it's also an 80?
No, it's a one-time event. We're doing something here that's going to be around in 50 years. I can appreciate that there are parents who are going to be unhappy with the pain of having to be redistricted, some more than others, but
So if that's the case, would a 70 be appropriate?
70?
It's very close, but not exactly the same, so a 70, a 75?
Let's plug 70 for now.
70. Probability of maintaining equity across schools.
that's high.
80.
75.
Would you say it's high to the point where it's even higher than 80?
Could be. But I would put minimum of 80.
Any other feelings for that?
Doesn't the number 3 imply it's lower than number 2? Change it to number 2 if we.
I can change it to be a 2, and it'll be an 80. That's fine.
I'm not suggesting, I just want to be consistent.
I think, Mel,
That does seem more
that
consistent.
is consistent and a good idea.
So I'm gonna put
Both.
80 here. I'm gonna make this a 2 now,
Yep.
okay? Then we have, probability of providing appropriate common, recreational, and administrative space.
70?
70?
Okay. Next, we have radius proximity. Now,
Is that, well, how is that radius?
Neil's argued that half a mile is about what we currently, how we define our districts today as neighborhood schools.
So should these be combined into,
Yes, I'd combine them
okay,
and then I'll work the numbers to see what's a good differentiator.
okay, and I'm gonna put to be determined by Neil. Okay, but,
But what about the rating?
but what's the rating?
yeah, but is it,
As you say, if you, in north of Route 9, pretty much, you get a quarter of a mile away from one school and you're less than a quarter of a mile away from another.
Cynthia, didn't we say when you and I talked about this that we were gonna plug the number in, like whatever the percentage of students was there?
Let's
you-
just find out what the numbers say,
what-
and then
you
see if
awarded
it,
for that
We
number.
don't know anymore. We don't
Right.
know yet.
Well,
Neil was gonna try to
That's
tell
what he's
us.
working, so we don't really have to come up with a numerical ranking for.
No, but we
Well, we
need
should,
to
though.
do a weighting.
We
we have a
should
we have a
still weight it?
weighting.
Okay.
Yeah.
should have a weighting. I
And
mean,
it's,
this speaks to walkability.
no, it's
How
the
is
proxy for
walkability-
neighborhood schools.
How does walkability compare in terms of importance compared to the other ones that you have up there? Is it just as important as distributing, redistricting, providing adequate space? Or right now you have it right underneath. So if it's right underneath, is it like a 65 or is it a 60?
I think it's 65 or 70. It's either slightly below or equal.
I think it should be rated a number 3, not a number 4 in priority,
Yeah.
because neighborhood schools is a big
Yeah,
a big
So if
issue.
I can make this a 3 and
Yeah.
it could be a 70 as well.
Yeah,
Right,
that's,
so could we revisit redistricting again? Because
Right.
there's some question in my mind as to whether redistricting is, again, it's a one-time mess, but it's only one
So
time.
you can think about
Right.
basically how does redistricting compare to walkability? What's more important?
I think walkability is, and I would put it,
But I would argue the key concept in that sentence is the term equitably.
Equitably, right, right,
It's not so much the redistricting, it's the equitable redistricting.
right.
So what if the group, what if we put this as a 3 and set it
Yeah,
at
you're
70?
right. There is a long-term impact from inequitable
Yes.
redistricting because of, that's the issue that we're grappling with broadly, so.
Right.
I'll put this as incorporated into 0.5 miles. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, are you fine with me changing this to be a 3, and then this over here is a 70?
Yeah.
I've lost my, as equity, I'm looking at number 7, okay? I'm wondering whether we have a confusion about the word equitably here. Do we mean that we're spreading out the redistricting equitably amongst the citizens who have to be redistricted, or are we talking about the equity diversity issue? Which one do you?
Oh, the equity diversity issue is above it, and it's a number 2.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the first, not first of all.
Right
First
here.
first thing you said. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, So-
But maybe this should be interpreted as fairly, equitably fairly,
Number,
not,
It's about number of households that
Yeah.
have to move. I mean, have to change
So
schools.
I would change the word equitably because it gets confused with the diversity. And if you want to say fairly, I think that's better.
Yeah, it's minimal, it's the minimal impact, not the
If you're
equitable impact.
redistricted, it's not, you know, you
That's
are
what we're
or you
looking for.
aren't.
Neil, do you have a, how would
It's
you?
your area. Do you have a phrase that makes sense to you?
How this become my area?
Because you're doing the redistricting allocations.
Numbers guy.
The numbers. Is fairly a better word than equitably?
But evenly.
As,
Or minimally.
Minimally is the right word, I think. I don't know
Well, you don't,
Minimally is overall, but you're talking about relative to one district versus others.
Right, that's right, Bill.
minimally, right?
It's about not having one district's groups of families
right,
having
we
to
don't
do a
want to
lot more.
disproportionately dislocate one or some
think-
districts
How about
compared to
proportionally
others.
as little
as-
dislocation.
As proportionally as possible?
I think you just have to add after possible between districts or among districts.
Okay.
How about put in equally instead of equitably, and that's all.
I don't think there's any way to do equally.
No, as equally,
Oh.
as possible.
Okay.
Okay, how's that?
And is that a realistic goal, Neil?
It's,
Well, and yes,
you're just working towards that.
some districts, some of the districting studies had a narrower,
That was
range of the curve. You know, the Baldwin, we had 70% of the Heath district changing schools, and none of the other studies had that kind of impact.
Right.
So, yeah.
Then I have, so after that, we have probability of minimizing the number of transitions for students.
40.
Technically, that's now 4, this is a 5.
But I think that's in the same place as the concept school, because K to 8 is the model we're settling on, and all of our options are K to 8. They have the same number of transitions. So it's none of our options are differentiated by the number of transitions.
Well, we're bringing back,
It's an exception to that.
Yep.
Well, you take the K and add it to the beep options.
Is that still on the table?
Yeah, I think those are still on the table, so that's an additional transition.
and while the 8, 9 is off, I'd at least like to talk for a minute about 7, 8 being part of the high school, physically, which then would impact that.
Okay, so how does this criteria, you could also work on any of the other 3 criteria, I'll highlight them right now. How do they, you can work on the lowest one, the probability of continued availability of swing space. If it's low, how low would you say it is in relative weight to all these others?
20.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
20?
Yep.
Okay,
Said maybe 30, but 20 is fine.
I was going to say 30, but I don't think it makes a lot of difference.
In order to hear short.
opportunity for transportation safety.
I give 4 and 5 60s.
So how do people feel about that? Making this actually a 4 as well, and then making this both 60s? Does that seem like an approximate location of how the importance these criteria are to
Maybe
each other?
50s.
50s?
Well, my problem with the safety issue is that to me, it's a given, because we're simply not going to create a design which is unsafe. It goes without saying. And, the police department probably wouldn't let us, and they're going to be responsible for it. And we're not going to want to do it anyway. So if it's unsafe, if it's deemed unsafe by the police department, it's out of the question.
Well, when we analyze it against the criteria, then we may find that they're all equivalent. and if they're all equivalent, there's no advantage from one alternative to another in terms of safety.
Alan, to your point, it's opportunity is the key word there, and so we're not necessarily, we need to pick an option before it's been fully vetted for safety, so we need to pick one that's likely to be safe and has an opportunity for safety. That's why I'd keep it in, but.
So I'm going to bring it back to the question of Ken's suggestion to bring these both as number 4 and put this as a, actually I heard an adjustment, how about 50?
Oh, 60.
Does that sound appropriate? Okay, I'm going to put 50s here for now. This is now 5. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to break for 5 minutes because I need to readjust the spreadsheet because now we've dramatically reduced the number of criteria, which I think is a very good thing for you guys. And then I'm going to just adjust the spreadsheet. We'll come back in 5 minutes. Everyone take a quick bathroom break, and then we'll go from that point.
I have that, Mike. Thank you.
I like it. Because, sometimes I get sick.
Go have more.
Aware of my bodily functions and be
One thing is,
reminded.
with the guy who left, he actually might have learned something if he sat down.
Right.
Should have said that to him if I thought quickly. Might actually get something out of it.
They said, they call it a bathroom? Oh, yeah. It's not the sidebar room.
That must be different nature of facilities, different cultures around.
There you go.
What do you say, and B, what do you do?
Changed shirts since I saw you last. The number so far, we have 419 signatures earlier this afternoon. Just as many as the Avery petition, I might add. Okay, actually, a little earlier, we had more, so I don't know, I call it too close to call.
You know the difference? Avery, every time someone signs, you get an email.
Oh, really? Lucky you.
Because we've got
Well, see, hi, thank you for handing you a hard copy. Mike, by the way, I'm Sarah Bowes. We had an email exchange. Nice to meet you personally.
Yes.
I'm not
And
Aspen
what I
Wall.
said to you,
Thank you. Well, I appreciated your response. It's good to know it doesn't just go into a void.
no,
So,
it doesn't mean
great, thank you.
we're paying attention to the
Yeah, I understand that. It's difficult. But I told Neil on the train on the way here, we happen to be standing there. Please do. Here's my solution. Get it down to Avery versus Old Lincoln. Do the redistricting like under the Avery option, but then send those kids to Old Lincoln. And then you'll quickly see the issues coming to focus and people lining up to build a school on Avery. Seriously though, it's good enough to say keep our park and send other people's kids to Old Lincoln.
the part, that particular part, and this is why I made the point about Lynch. Lynch's green space carry the same weight in the town, it doesn't have the same value.
Yeah.
It was put in a place. It would be a very difficult thing to take a chunk out of that. That's not to suggest that if you have Avery versus Lincoln,
You don't, you
I'm
don't
not sure.
I wanted to hear what they were talking about.
I'd say, okay, that's our only two choices.
Well, I appreciate your open-mindedness on that, because it seems to me that a lot of people think it's a foregone conclusion that it's never, and I think it's, just, very unfair to consider sending a discrete portion of the population to what would be a very substandard school on a very substandard
There,
site.
however, I think there's a focus on the fact that it's right down from the old ugly building that was built in 1607. And I can have some appreciation because the high school building was from 1892 and it was facilities. The best high school in the city. It was a good place.
part is
That's the
always
fault.
across Route 9, and that part
That's
is bordered by Route 9 train tracks, and there will now be a hotel right next to it.
The Route 9 part,
Route 9 train tracks hotel.
it's the Route 9 and splitting, it's on the wrong side of Route 9. If you pick the damn thing up and move it across the road,
Yes,
it'd be on the
right.
side.
And where I live, 1 block from Lawrence, 3 blocks to Pierce, it would be extremely inequitable to send me nearly a mile and
Oh,
across
it's a
Route
pain in the
9.
ass, there's no question. And Route 9 is a bear to deal with in the morning. It's awful.
It is.
Transportation, well, you don't have to tell me about Route 9. I can tell you how many cars go by that spot, 50,000 a day.
Yep. And there's lots of studies out there, and they've been forwarded, and they're referenced in the materials about schools on major highways and the health effects that has.
Right, although again, HVAC systems, heat ventilation systems will be put in place to mitigate that.
Not on the playground.
Old Lincoln and Baldwin are so close to each other.
It's exponential. Once you get, I think it's 100 yards.
Yeah, you mean it's a curve like that? It drops off that job?
It does. It's like, I think that, I believe that it's 100 yards is the critical portion, and once you get behind 100 yards, it's dissipated like
You know how
almost
to measure how
completely.
far Lincoln and Baldwin are. They're pretty-
No, I know, and I have heard that,
Baldwin's
that
within
part of it perhaps, but not all of it. And it's a question of, comparing on the matrices about what's the least
I'm sorry, I'm
preferable.
making you be there.
Least preferable and most preferable, So Old Lincoln, and really, I have to say, the environmental and health factors are not even on your list.
It's true, we weren't discussing them, and we didn't put them on the list. I think the transportation, the fact that it's on Route 9 all by itself carries a burden with it. That is a larger burden than potential health and environmental issues, because I think you can mitigate with an HVAC system. Could fix that. That's certainly the industry. I agree with that. But when they're recessed,
Two schools on the same side, you turn Pierce into a super.
it's not the key problem is on Route 9.
So they're gonna say you cannot.
Early education game would go.
All of this other stuff is also.
You buy private houses, large private houses.
Our petition is on the,
Figure houses for an investment of about $5 million for a school district. You get that. You get these things much. And maybe that's even a better educational model. That is the
I'm Sarah Hall.
one of the
Now I recognize you have a role. There's so much dressed up in like. I got the same photo on your.
Nice to meet you.
explain to them, not debate. And Erica Keyes has been very active.
I'm concerned about feasibility.
I said one sentence.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you, Sean.
Excellent. Nothing. That's it. The right one. It's a no-brainer with my arm. I understand. I don't know what the air quality is like. Does anybody know what that is? Yes, it is. In my own mind, if expansion in place works, if it can work, minimal changes in education. At the very school, that would be optimal. Yeah, but my second,
Okay, we can start getting back together, please. like to get the meeting started again, please? Will the B-Space Committee members please take your seats?
Industrial waste on the site.
What I'd like to do next is, based upon, now we have a shorter list of criteria, I'd like the committee to go through the criteria and review it against each of the alternatives to consider. Now, there are a number of alternatives that we can consider for tonight. We can limit our analysis. We had 6 options that we had considered last time on July 1st. Baldwin, Amory, Old Lincoln School, new K through 8 at Brookline High School, neighborhood schools, and a concept school at Baldwin. There are also other options that we could put on the table, but it's up to you guys to decide how, I mean, again, this is not the final analysis, but this is at least sort of the second pass that we're doing to try to get closer to analysis that will result in a recommendation that you will make to the school committee. So at this point, would you like to consider any of these options? I also have what we started doing in terms of alternatives and the must criteria. Are there some alternatives that sort of emerge and that you would like to be considered in today's analysis? I have right now 6 plus 8, plus 6 plus 4 more options
I
just listed
thought
up.
we took Amory off the table. Did we
Okay.
not?
And I just want to confirm with the group if that's going to be the case. Okay? Okay. Anything else? So we have,
Are we still looking seriously at a new K through 8 at the high school?
Right,
No.
that's
I
the
think you
next
can
one.
take D off.
Right.
so D will be removed?
Yep.
Is that a group? Yep. Okay. New K through 8 at Brookline High School is removed.
Now, you have option A and option F that both have to do with Baldwin, right?
Yes.
And
That's a concept school at Baldwin or a K through 8 at Baldwin.
so to me, that's the same alternative because let me just finish for a minute. In fact, if we decide to build a K through 8 at Baldwin, it would be the administration could then decide after doing some research with the community as to whether or not it should be a concept school or not. That's my point.
Well, the difficulty is sorting, but we're going to need to sort that out ahead of time because the rankings will be quite different. Baldwin carries with it the disadvantage if it's a K through 8, like all the other K through 8s.
If it's a district K through 8.
Yeah, if it's district K through 8, thank you. It carries with it the burden of causing a massive redistricting across the town.
Right.
And it interrupts the neighborhood
So
school
if,
concept and so forth.
yeah, right. If you leave concept school in, you have avoided the redistricting issue.
I agree with you in that sense, Michael, that if we took because the redistricting is such a brouhaha with a standard K through 8, I would actually take that one off and leave the concept there.
So do you think then,
Well, wait a minute.
Bill, a concept school is driven by an educational imperative.
Right.
There hasn't been an educational
any.
imperative from the very people who would give us an educational imperative for a concept school.
And I guess what I'm saying is that they will look very carefully at that when they have the people, the leadership hired there to do the research as to...
Alan, you're talking something that couldn't possibly meet the timetable then.
No, that's right. In other words, that would not
It
be
would
something...
be eliminated
Can I-
based on the
Can
timetable.
I restate a question for you guys as a group? Do you want to continue considering a new K through 8 at Baldwin School?
Yes.
And do you want to continue considering a concept school?
So you're asking this committee
Yes.
to consider the programming
Right.
when the school administration hasn't put forward a program for us to consider.
So then you wouldn't have the data to do the analysis,
Correct.
Yeah.
correct?
Right.
So then maybe it's appropriate for us not to consider the concept schools a part of our analysis tonight.
Agreed.
Yes.
But I'm just saying, Alan, if you feel intensely that that's a mistake, let us know, because I would, I'd
But
let
just
it ride.
in terms of our standard for meeting the time frame, I don't see how that would work.
I agree, but we do some deferences to the chairman of the school committee.
Well, but
I'm only one voice. I'm only one.
the timetable.
How does the group feel? Is it appropriate, for us to spend the time, because this is precious time that we have together right now, should we spend the time to still consider a concept school? What do you guys think?
Certainly not tonight. And it seems to me if we're going to consider a concept school, we need to know what the concept is.
I guess I do disagree with that a concept, I think it's not, we can't really make a legitimate judgment as to what the concept should be. We can encourage the administration or discourage them from
So.
having that option out there.
I'm sorry, we're being asked to make a recommendation in September. There is, based on the timetable we've discussed, not, I think, a reasonable expectation that we would have any kind of argument from the educational authorities as to a justification for a concept school.
This will also come out in our analysis. For example, you already see here that we need data. So if you need data, you can't complete the analysis for this. You need the data to firmly, recommend or not firmly recommend this option. So,
I'm not normally willing to go with something that isn't practical and logical, but this is one where I think there's an exception. I think we ought to let this one sit there and see how the numbers come out. And it may be that we'll take it off, or that
Sure.
it will appear so
okay,
disadvantageous.
I will keep it in for now. So these are kept in. What about some of these other ones? They were just populated in from time to time, but I didn't know if there's also any other options that you would rather consider. Right now, we have
Can we go back for one second?
1, 2, 3, 4 from the last analysis.
Opportunity for meeting the enrollment goals based on a voluntary program, and that would have been an important criteria in evaluating concept school. So the grading's not going to come out very, very just on that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've got to put that criteria back in.
Well, to a certain extent, you're arguing with the wrong guy. I'm supporting Alan's feeling that there's some potential that, that might be made to work. I can't judge.
I'll go back to the point I was making at the last meeting. Which was, Dr. Lupini said the problem with the concept school is the unpredictability of getting the correct enrollment for it. So that's why we added that concept, that criteria of, in a voluntary program, predictability of result. And we've eliminated that based on the idea that we weren't really considering concept school anymore. So we're going to have to go back and put that criteria back.
I think that is the solution, Ken.
Okay.
I agree with
But
that.
I'll put this at the bottom of our list because we don't have time to put it in properly right now. But this is the probability
Probability of meeting enrollment
Of
in
meeting
a
enrollment.
voluntary
Program.
program.
with a voluntary program. Okay?
Okay.
For you guys to sort out later. Okay? And in the meantime, though, for tonight, should we consider this concept school as a list? We'll do that, okay?
Yes.
What about these other options? These were populated by some committee members, but should I keep in these new four? There's four of them. Worthington Road, Boston University, a 2 high school plus 7, 8, and then K through 6, a multi-site expansion,
I think
and,
that's the same as neighborhood schools.
okay, so this is the same as neighborhood schools?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna hide this one.
We really take that out. Is that okay?
And then I have early education, pre-K, K, multi-site centers.
Right, well, I'm glad to speak to option H, or option H and option J, but I think that Selectman DeWitt would be interested in speaking to option J. There are two ideas that we see possible to create some interesting new programmatic ideas on the one hand, and on the other hand, reduce maybe the capital expenditures to some extent.
Okay? Is that fine with the group? Okay. And keeping in the Worthington Road, Boston University option, for example?
Yeah, and just for everybody's sake, that is an option which we are going to be discussing with BU very shortly.
Right, so it's probably not worth discussing it tonight, then, if that's the case.
Because it's, don't have enough information.
Leave it in the list, but don't plan to.
Yes, I'm leaving it in a list, but I'm hiding it for now because I want to focus on the analysis for tonight.
So with H
It
and
is-
J, we're not gonna talk, that's off, or is it?
You want to include in tonight's analysis, or? I
See,
mean,
the Worthington, to me, the Worthington option, if it's viable, is a legitimate northeast option. So I think that we could rate that tonight
Okay,
with our,
I'm not the one who took it off the list.
okay, so I'll keep it, I'll keep it in?
I would.
Okay,
And
all right, so we have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options in front of us.
Are H and J worth talking about?
I think that we can talk about them very quickly as we go along.
Okay, so what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to not follow strict choosing by advantages procedure by allowing us to, some of the homework that some of the committee members did, started filling out these options, these advantages according to each criteria. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the line that says attribute to explain why something is higher versus highest, for instance, or lower versus lowest. So for the first criteria, I have, and so what we're doing right now is we're going to spend some time to check the assessment of the advantage of each of these alternatives for each criteria. And we're just going to confirm if the assessment is correct and to also identify the basis for that assessment. So the first one I have is criteria is probability of meeting or exceeding current educational program, including achieving target student-teacher ratio and class size. I have higher probability for new K through 8 at Baldwin School, Old Lincoln School, and neighborhood schools. I have a lower probability at the concept school at Baldwin, the highest probability at Worthington Road, a highest probability at 2 high school plus 7, 8, and a lower probability for the early education pre-K. And so how does that sound to you guys? Does it sound correct?
So I
And if
just
so,
need an explanation for the lower probability at concept school.
Yeah,
And
why is
highest
that?
at Worthington.
Yeah,
Now,
really?
why is that the highest?
And if you can't resolve why it's the highest, then you might say high, but what determines between
And
a
how
high?
can we say
low?
with neighborhood schools that it's a high probability, because we don't know how many classrooms yet the neighborhood schools is going to yield? But isn't that what's going to drive that particular criteria?
So you could put need data in this one,
Data, yes.
Right.
okay? So I'll put need data in neighborhood schools.
Seems like G is a need data as well. Okay? Now, I'm not at all clear about highest priority under H. That sounds like a need data too.
Well, especially since we haven't studied it.
Right.
Okay. All right. So how do then we determine between a lower probability versus, right now I have a high probability, higher probability? Old Lincoln School, new K through 8 at Baldwin, and Concept School, and early education pre-K.
Sorry, I'm not clear what you're asking.
How do we explain why the Concept School at Baldwin and the early education pre-K multi-site centers have a lower probability of achieving, meeting or exceeding current educational program versus Baldwin and Old Lincoln School?
The concept school is going to skim the cream, I think is maybe the thought behind that.
No, but that would make it off the table if we couldn't do it with Equitably.
Then you need to explain how it would be done.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here because we're struggling with the fact that we don't have a concept.
Right. And
School
So for the concept schools, do we need to mark need data in that case?
I think we have to assume that those are all gonna be equal, otherwise we're not gonna do them. And
That's
not-
one way of saying it as well.
Not knowing what we're doing doesn't mean we're not gonna do it.
We're gonna do something we don't know what we're doing.
Right, but let's not talk about that, is what I'm getting at.
So,
Got it. Now it all becomes clear.
so for Philip's point being is that it is safe to assume as a group that any option, any alternative you pursue will achieve at the minimum, right, or exceed it. It's going to be the case for all of them. And that,
yeah, and I'm not clear where the lower probability for an early ed center
Right.
came from, because in a
I'm not
way,
either.
that's a potentially a strong candidate for innovation and other things, so.
Right.
Let's move on to something where we can differentiate.
Yeah, right.
Like-
so, I mean, this is the point, that's a very important point, Philip, that in this case, every case should be meeting or exceeding, right?
Yes.
So you can't see this as a differentiator between alternatives, okay? So I'm gonna put this now, this right here, I'm gonna make it as a gray. And I'm gonna put this entire, thing as a gray, okay? Because this is not, it's all equivalent, okay?
Yep.
All right. So next we have, the probability of minimizing the number of transition for students. I have
Everything in
higher probability for these three,
the program is the same.
and I have just the highest probability for, just a bump up for Worthington Road,
Why?
and
Where did that come from?
Somebody
a lower probability.
jigged it.
Well, this is for you guys to determine, is it going to be equivalent for each of these options, or is there going to be a
All
differentiator?
the K to 8s are gonna be equivalent.
Yeah, if we had a K through 8 that would be comparable to other K through 8s, they'd all be the same.
Okay, so if all the K through 8s are the same, the only difference I see is the
J.
H and J are different.
H and J. So how would they compare? So if all the others, I'm going to put this higher probability over here. Is that okay with you guys? Because these are all K through 8s, from N to the left.
And I think that option J is equivalent because the supervision of pre-K and K is the same now. And what we would have there would be 1 through 8, and I think that's going to be equivalent.
Yeah, but Alan, a lot of our kids don't go to BEEP, so they're only making one transition, and That's when they go into K. If they're starting at K and in one school and then going to first grade, that's an extra transition.
That's true.
So then this one would have, that's why it has a lower probability. So students who start at K will have two transitions to deal with.
Yep.
Okay? And then,
And option H should be the same, because if that's a K through 6 and then 7 through 12, that's the same, it's one transition.
I agree.
so would it be higher or lower probability?
It would be, that is higher, not highest.
Higher.
Right.
Higher.
Okay? So I have higher, you know, basically all these are higher and just one lower due to
Right.
the,
Okay, good.
And
Okay.
If I could suggest on H, or whatever that was, make
Sure.
it right K through 8, comma, 7 through 12, just to make it really clear what we're talking about.
sure. This one right here?
No, H, sorry.
Yeah.
K through 6, comma, 7 through 12, because that's what we're
7
talking
through 12.
about.
Okay?
No, get rid of the two
Get rid
H's.
of what's to the left of the slash, of the,
Yeah, exactly,
of the stroke, as the British say.
exactly, thank you.
Okay? All right. Probability of maintaining equity across schools in terms of student diversity, for example, free reduced lunch, socioeconomic, special ed, racial, cultural. At Baldwin, you have lowest prior probability, Old Lincoln as high. Need data at the concept school, and I'm going to put that in caps.
Yep.
High probability,
I would argue for E, we don't know yet because we may have to do redistricting depending on where we're able to add classrooms. So we can't answer that until we have that.
so I'll put need data,
Yeah, you're right.
okay?
And, northeast, the criterion is, sorry, go back.
Achieving
Equity.
equity, maintaining equity across schools.
The northeast option doesn't do a particularly as good a job of that as,
Old Lincoln did the best job.
as Lincoln does, as Old Lincoln does.
So I will do higher probability
Higher.
Yep.
for Old Lincoln.
Yeah.
And then this will just be high
Right.
probability,
Right.
okay? I have this option H as highest probability. Is that appropriate or not? Or does this need data, actually?
Well, if the K through 6s were the 8 existing schools with no redistricting, then I imagine that it would be high. I don't know about highest, but high.
Yeah, it would be the same.
Would it be higher or would
Same.
it be high?
Highest.
Is highest appropriate?
I think it's equivalent to the other
To Old Lincoln?
highs.
Higher.
Higher, okay. And and what was the logic behind that? So between the northeast and these other two? Why is this high?
It requires a second, the option H, which one are you talking about?
Option G,
Oh, G, sorry.
the Worthington Road. Why is it just just lower than?
I think if you look at the redistricting, if you put a school in that particular location and set the districts along the lines of what the data suggests they would be, you would have a more skewed, less equitable distribution. Demographics is the reason.
Okay, I'll just write more skewed distribution. Okay. And over here, for this one right here, I'm sorry, I forgot to, and then, so I have higher probability, and the early ed programs, is it appropriate as a high, or is it a higher, actually? This is to maintain equity. I mean, I'm sorry?
We're debating the thing that we have already settled on, don't worry about it.
Okay, so for the early ed centers, are they correct as a high, so they're sort of on par with the northeast option? Or are they more on par with the K through 6, 7 through 12, and the Old Lincoln School option
Well,
in terms of?
it doesn't require any, it assumes the districts stay the same.
Uh-huh,
So if we're satisfied with the status quo,
So, it could just be,
Where does
in
it,
between.
where is Baldwin on this?
Baldwin is the lowest probability.
Definitely.
So does it fall between Baldwin and, for example, the northeast option? This is the pre-K, K.
No, it's better than the Northeast option.
Right.
It's better than the northeast option?
Yep.
So if it's better than the northeast option, I'm gonna put it as a higher probability.
Yep.
is the status quo better than the northeast option?
Yeah.
Remember?
I think so.
From a redistricting point of view, right?
Okay,
From an equity.
Equity,
Oh, we're doing equity?
yes.
Yeah. And I had forgotten to write down the reason why there's a lower probability for the early ed programs for the number of transitions is because there will be a transition needed
For those who
At-
come to
at
K.
Into first grade.
Right.
for K.
Can you freeze that left column?
Sure, I could do that.
Yes, that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
That is for Bill Gates.
Well, I'll be using less space. I'll probably, and I can't quite go like that. Okay.
It was actually
All right. So here we go.
4, because it was in Lotus 1 through 3.
Now I have probability of providing appropriate common, recreational, and administrative space. What I have is for Baldwin as the highest probability. Old Lincoln is probable, fair probability. There might have been two different
I
people.
would say for neighborhood school on that, at our next meeting, we're gonna determine that.
Okay, so this
This is
needs
back to
data.
need data.
Yeah.
Okay, probable. Then I have concept school at Baldwin as highest probability.
Yep.
Worthington Road as highest probability.
Yep, new school.
K through 6, 7 through 12 is highest probability, and probable for the pre-K, K. So you have these three this is for probability providing common space.
Why isn't option J highest probability? We're going to take kindergartens out of the existing schools and make space available within them. Although we'd have to.
I don't think we know what will be available to a pre-K early ed center yet. It's actually need information probably.
Need data?
Yeah, need data.
Okay. So I have need data, highest, 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 need data, and highest. So I have a highest probability. All those were highest with the exception of Old Lincoln School. Is that sound right? Of providing appropriate common, recreational, and administrative space.
The recreational one is the tough one now, because you
I'm gonna
take
put-
the shell of the building and you can put anything in it, but there's no way that you can do anything with the recreation.
Okay. All right. So I've just put, Old Lincoln School will be different from all the others. All the others are equivalent. And this is due to, why is this lower? Because
The, restricted recreation.
Restricted
space.
site.
restricted site. Okay? All right. Now we have radius proximity. This is still need data, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we can't do these for now. Opportunity for transportation safety.
That's the highest opportunity there is.
I have highest, better, but I can adjust these to be fair opportunity. Let's get these three. Is this sound right, or does this one need data?
I would say Old Lincoln is, that's going to be tough. It's going to be, it's going to take some very careful thought and design, and the feasibility is questioned.
Okay. Should I put it as lower opportunity?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I have a highest opportunity, a lower opportunity.
It's no change, really.
No change.
No change for the neighborhood schools?
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna put just no change. Okay? Concept school at Baldwin,
Yeah, that's the same thing. It's highest, yeah.
Highest.
Worthington Road.
Need data. Don't know.
Okay.
Depends on the size of the site.
Option H.
So that's an interesting one. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, the next one is an interesting one.
Well, this is actually the status quo, I think. It's the same,
This is
well, it's still 8 K through 8s
the same building.
and some kind of expansion at the high school, but it's still the high school. Or 2 high schools, sorry.
You have 2 high schools, so the chances are you'll have less traffic.
Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna pick a second high school site without it being superior for that.
Right.
So I'd say you got a higher opportunity.
So would I write higher opportunity for this one?
Yeah. Highest, higher.
Oh, highest. Higher or highest?
Higher.
Okay. And then I have the early ed.
I think that's a more difficult one than people may think about. Although they're small, there are going to be a number of small sites.
Will it have to be need data because you don't have the sites?
Right. But it is certainly going to be challenging because in that case, we know all children will be driven.
Right.
Well, most children, not necessarily all.
So I have
Well, actually,
I have higher opportunity for K through 6, 7 through 12. I have highest opportunity for Concept School at Baldwin. I have a lower opportunity for Old Lincoln School and highest opportunity for Baldwin. So what is the reason for the Old Lincoln School being lower opportunity?
Route 9.
Route 9?
Yes.
This one is-
And then what is the reason for having a highest distinction between Baldwin School and being highest and option H, K through 6?
Sign with a clean sheet of paper. You can do what you want, pretty much.
Well, I would guess part of the difference could be that Baldwin has potentially more area and would allow for better transportation management, whereas the
Okay.
other alternative is, I don't think we have enough information to say for
Okay.
sure.
So I'm going to just put potentially more area. Okay? Next, we have ability to distribute redistricting across districts as equitably as possible between and among districts.
The reason there's demographics.
There's a low ability for Baldwin. There's someone noted that there's a perceived problem with Old Lincoln School. And both lowest ability and fair ability came. So ability to distribute redistricting,
You have to give a reason for A.
right?
Well,
Why is there,
A
this is
produced
due to
the,
it was due to the report, right?
right,
The data
it
that.
produced the
Largest distortion.
largest distortion.
Yeah, largest displacement.
Right, displacement, that's right.
Right.
Analysis.
Okay? And then, what about Old Lincoln School and neighborhood schools?
Old Lincoln wasn't too bad.
Well, Lincoln wasn't that bad. I don't know why it's slowest ability there.
Yeah.
So what should I put in here?
Wasn't that the?
Okay, we're not.
So,
Well, kids
Well-
are currently crossing Route 9, go to
Better-
Pierce.
Better ability.
what I can do is here, well, Neil looks it up, is I can say to be determined. Actually, Neil, for this criteria, should we hold off on this criteria?
Yeah,
Because,
that can be quantified.
because, so,
That's just,
I would leave that it's a perceived problem, because I think that's one of the issues.
right, but I'm just saying, for tonight's analysis, Neil, would you have to find a lot more data to fill in these blocks correctly?
no,
Or is this fine? I mean, can we?
we can fill in, well, not for Old Lincoln. We know what the district studies show for Old Lincoln, we know what the district studies show for Baldwin, and we know what the district studies show for the Northeast.
Right, we have to look at the data.
Yeah, we just have to look at it and characterize it, but we have the data.
Okay, so between those three, I can pull up the presentation, I guess. I'm not
But
sure.
don't
if I-
do that now. Why don't you just say examine data?
Should I call it moderate ability there?
This one is moderate ability.
Moderate ability.
For the moment, we have the advantage of being able to
Okay, neighborhood schools,
I think
it's a
that's-
better ability.
That's the,
So that's, you know, it,
that's optimal.
okay, so neighborhood schools is better than Old Lincoln School, which is better than Baldwin.
But we
Okay.
won't know for sure until we see if redistricting is going to be necessary, but just intuitively.
That's a good intuitive guess.
Should I fill in anything for concept school at Baldwin? Is it also the same as, is it fair ability? I mean, somebody put in fair ability, or should it be low ability or moderate ability?
Same as K through 8, existing neighborhood schools.
Actually, since it's likely to be quite voluntary,
Can't be voluntary.
To some extent.
I said to some extent.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, quite. So in that case, there would be fewer people
Yeah,
who would be displaced.
right. That's at least equal to
The neighborhood
the
schools.
neighborhood
But
school,
that's what I was saying.
neighborhood schools with additions.
So should I put better ability for now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right, and then we have Worthington Road.
Moderate ability, well, Worthington Road's slightly better than Old Lincoln School because there was an even better distribution in the Northeast, so
Okay, so should I put it as
better ability.
better ability? Okay. And then this is due to the maps, right?
Yep.
And then the K through 6 and 7 to 12, because it's close to the neighborhood schools. Is that
Yep.
why you would do that? As
Uh,
better ability? That's what neighborhood schools is.
Yep. Was
And then-
neighborhood schools better or highest, or?
Neighborhood schools is the highest right now. You have a moderate ability of Old Lincoln School. So there's maybe 3 grades of low, moderate, and better.
Thank you.
And then how about the early ed?
Well, it would be for first through 8th grade, it would be like neighborhood schools.
So I'll put neighborhood schools in here for now, and we'll keep it as better ability. Again, this is not the final analysis. This is our second pass. Committee members afterwards can refine and double check if this was a proper way, but we're trying to at least get through most of these points, okay? So probability of site availability. We have about 5 more to do. So probability of site availability.
Okay.
Right.
High.
Highest is good.
Yeah.
Baldwin.
Highest probability is for Baldwin, Old Lincoln School,
Yep.
Why is that low?
neighborhood schools.
Why is Old Lincoln School low, anybody?
It's not
It's
low.
highest.
It's highest.
I'm sorry, I must be
You're
looking
looking
at the wrong place.
Yeah. It's a little
I'm
hard.
getting
'cause it
fuzzy
keeps-
for me here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Actually, I have a process question.
Sure.
Seconds. We're getting very close to the witching hour for you, and the question is, what's the best use of the remaining?
I'd like to finish this analysis, and then what I can then do is fill in, the question is whether or not you want numbers tonight, but I think, we could fill in numbers, but the numbers would be just rough numbers for now, because you need to also define the gradation between each of them, and we would not have time for that. So what I would like to do is finish at least this step, and I think we should close up at that stage. And then what I can do is, fill it out, but then we have to sort of talk about then how do you define the gradation, because that's, okay? So I have highest, highest, and highest for Baldwin, Old Lincoln School, neighborhood schools. For the concept school, it's also highest. There's a low probability for Worthington Road.
Yep.
There's a probable for K through 6,
And I'd say
and
that's
there's a
only 'cause
probable for the early
education.
Say probable for the K-6, 7, 12, because it implies a second high school, and we haven't figured out where that goes yet, so I give it a lower probability than the highest.
Okay,
So if you put that note up there, would be good.
okay. Need
School requires second site.
second high school site. Okay? And then the early ed,
Same
we
thing.
need sites,
Need site.
right? Okay?
Yep.
So if that's fine, I'm going to move on to the next one. And for all these highest probabilities, because the school, you guys, the town owns these sites.
What is the criteria?
Probability of site availability.
Oh, still,
Okay. So next we have probability of continued availability of swing space. I have the Old Lincoln School being an exception of low.
probability, it's zero.
it's zero, right.
Okay.
Zero probability, right.
Zero probability, okay?
Yep.
I have highest, 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 and a probable for option H, and a probable for option
Since
J.
they could end up at the old Lincoln School
Right.
conceivably.
Yeah.
So,
You're gonna put
so I'm gonna put as,
a K center at Old Lincoln School?
Just, since we haven't identified the site, they could end up there. So.
possible Old Lincoln School site,
Need site.
or need site. Let's just put both of them as need site,
Yep.
okay? So, but does that sound right to you guys, that it's both are probable?
I think that the comment that was made, I think it's too low for early education, because we obviously would not cite that at Old Lincoln.
So,
So that
I have
means-
these as both probable. Is it fair to have them as equivalent?
Well, Lincoln would be available theoretically as swing space if we did early ed sites.
Right. So it's highest.
So is this highest then?
Certainly higher.
Higher? How would you make a difference?
It's not going to use Old Lincoln. If it's not going to use Old Lincoln, then it's like every other option, which is not going to use Old Lincoln, which we have named
Okay.
highest.
All right, so I'm gonna put highest probability down. This one just has probable because you need a second
Right.
high school site. And then just, there's zero probability with the Old Lincoln School. Okay? Then I have right here, probability of meeting enrollment need of 600. So I have highest, there's fair probability for Old Lincoln School. Depends on consultant's report. So this, I guess, I'll rewrite it as needs data.
Data, yeah.
The concept school at Old Baldwin has highest.
Well, should it be, I don't know enough about this, but given that you have to do a program and a facility, can those things happen concurrently?
Yeah. You wouldn't design the facility until you had a program.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is there a whole, time period for programming and then you start the facility?
No.
There's no
You
delay?
would, right.
Okay,
You would hire the staff early.
all right. I have highest probability here. Then after that, I don't have any assessments for the other three options. So how do these compare to the others?
Well, the concept school, where are we now?
We are talking about probability of meeting enrollment need.
I would say that that's just as high as the regular Baldwin.
So I have highest here, and the concept school is also highest.
Yeah.
And then I have a fair probability due to Old Lincoln School. And then now the question is, how about these three new options that you guys are considering now?
Well, I would say that Worthington is high, only because we don't know how long that's going to take, right?
Low. Low because we don't know. You mean low probability.
Lower.
And is it
Well, why don't we talk
Data.
about that next week when we have a little more information on
Okay.
that?
Fair enough. Need data.
Need data. Okay, what about K through 6, 7, 12, and the early ed?
High probability, high probability.
High or highest? Are they below? This is of meeting enrollment need.
What are the other ones, Cynthia?
The other ones right now, highest probability is Baldwin School Concept and New K through 8.
Yeah,
And there's a fair probability for Old Lincoln School.
Mel's comment is right. Since we don't have another site yet identified,
Yeah.
it's got to be lower.
It's got
So,
higher instead of highest.
Yeah,
so what's the probability of meeting enrollment need? Higher,
Higher,
but not highest.
but not
Okay.
highest.
and that's due to need a second site.
Yep.
Okay, what about the early ed pre-K centers?
Same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
Higher, but you need sites.
Yep.
Okay, so we have 2 left. Probability of community approval. I have fair probability for Baldwin, low probability for Old Lincoln School, highest probability for neighborhood schools. Okay? So try to remember that because I don't have a lot of scrolling space. Excuse me. A concept school has highest probability. What about Worthington Road?
Where does that get the highest community approval? What evidence do we have?
We've done
Option-
nothing to measure that.
Concept school, highest probability.
I don't think we know about concept school.
Okay, so I'm gonna put as needs data for concept school,
Yep.
okay? So we still have Baldwin, fair, Old Lincoln is low,
I don't know.
neighborhood schools is highest.
I don't know if you can say Old Lincoln is low, given the entire town's feelings about this, as George pointed out.
I can put it as
before,
lower,
lower.
and then I'm going to adjust over here. I need to put in something for Worthington Road and for K through 6, 7 through 12, and early ed.
So Worthington Road would be highest, right? And,
Why would it be highest?
Nobody even knows about it.
Well,
How could
it's kind of over the mass, oh, well, no, there's some, I'm thinking of the other, I'm thinking of Dummer Street. There are some mature trees, that's gonna affect people's, feelings. You know, we haven't really,
Don't know.
okay,
So would you guys say that in this case, that you guys will need more data? Or,
well,
I mean, think of how the cottage farm neighborhood came out against the hotel proposition there 20 years ago. There's likely to be plenty of opposition.
so what about the K through 6 and 7 through 12?
Not tested.
Does this need data as well?
Needs data as well, we haven't really floated that.
And what about the early ed?
That's an interesting
I think these are going to be,
I think it needs data.
data, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna put that down for now. Okay, we're down to the final stretch. So probability of MSBA reimbursement.
That's a,
So I put in, what was the reason for the fair probability versus a low probability and a fair probability versus a highest probability? I guess this, I could write this as preserves the
well, it's sort
existing.
of Baldwin is less worse than Old Lincoln in the mind, on balance within the community, I guess.
Well, it's because it's not a neighborhood, right?
It's not as it's not in a neighborhood on the, it skews the districts, but, doesn't appear to be as much opposition to that as there is to Old Lake.
There
Yeah.
will be once word gets out.
Maybe they just haven't printed the
They
right
haven't
color
mobilized,
t-shirts yet.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't bought their t-shirts.
Once people realized how many people would be
So-
redistricted and what it would mean, there would
Yeah.
be plenty of opposition.
Maybe next meeting.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I'm gonna take my shirt off.
is it going to be appropriate to have a difference between lower and fair, or do you guys want to say that you need to reassess this one right here?
I think fair probability is fine.
For now.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna need somebody later on to tell me the reason why versus the lower. Okay?
Neighborhood concerns.
And then we have probability of MSBA reimbursement.
Well, a new school, a new K through 8 is pretty high.
Yep.
Okay, so I have highest probability.
I think the neighborhood schools is still questionable. You could call it,
Why?
because we haven't had a reading as to how they would respond.
Because we'd have to get them to make an exception. If you remember what,
Catherine?
Catherine said, they normally don't do modulars, and they normally don't do things that have to be strung out over a long period of time.
But she said it wasn't out of the
But she
question.
said.
Right,
that's what I said,
it's
no.
not the highest,
Yeah.
it may not be the lowest either, but I don't think we've,
Should I put fair probability in between?
Yeah.
Nothing.
we're looking at neighborhood schools, George.
Neighborhood school.
Oh, your neighborhood.
Neighborhood additions to existing
But I want to
schools.
come back to Old Lincoln, because I don't think that's correct about it.
I agree with you.
I think it's a very high probability. You'd have to
Well,
reuse of
but
an existing
they
school?
have a criteria for community support, right?
You're hearing from a segment of the
I
community.
understand that.
You're not hearing from the entire community
I
here.
understand that.
Okay.
Yep.
So right now I have high versus highest.
I would give Old Lincoln a high.
High probability.
Yeah, I would not say low probability.
It's tough decisions, people.
Your community support, there's this criteria right here of community approval. So there's a difference, is there a difference between,
MSBA and
MSBA.
community. Yes.
Yeah.
there is, absolutely.
so this community support is captured in this one right here.
Correct.
And then what I will do is take that out because the probability MSBA reimbursement is based upon you guys working with MSBA, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what should I put here then?
High
I'd say
probability.
high probability. Remember, the true measure of community support is going to be the override.
Right, the distinction is MSBA simply will look at facility and how the facility meets the educational plan.
So how do I make a difference between the highest and the high probability right now?
Well, I do think that the limited site at Lincoln, Old Lincoln will provide some, it probably is not a high probability, it could be maybe a fair, because they're gonna look at new standards, aren't they?
Right.
Yes. I'm going to once more say that if we have anyone else who makes a comment from the public, I'm going to ask you to leave.
I need to leave because it's getting absurd.
Go ahead.
So right now we have the highest probability for the Baldwin, fair probability for Old Lincoln due to a limited site, high probability for the neighborhood schools.
I'd have to give
And-
one a fair.
What's that?
I don't think the neighborhood schools are high.
What would they be?
I'd give it a fair also.
Why no?
Fair?
Because of what what their standard is. I mean, their historical practices, they don't do that. They don't do a multiple site project. Never heard of one.
Well, they did it actually with Runkle and then Heath.
Right.
It was a
Overlapping.
separate project.
Yeah, right, but if you do a sequence of projects, right?
I think the issue here is the timeline, and could we simultaneously go forward with multiple sites, George? I don't know for sure, but I think that's a question mark anyway.
Which, by the
I
way,
don't know how they would see it. It's probably unprecedented.
the
I'm going to put over here to be examined.
okay?
Okay.
And I'm gonna put lack history of multi-site.
Good.
For now.
That's good.
I'm gonna put fair probability, and then you guys can
Or you could
adjust
just
it.
say unknown.
Unknown, needs data. Okay. Then I have right now the concept school at Baldwin as highest probability.
Well, we have to convince them of the,
We have to have a concept.
have to have the concept, but assuming that we have a
Needs data.
school, we're gonna have a concept, so, okay.
Is this needs data, or is it,
No, I think
If we went forward with that and had a program, they would
that's right.
fund it.
In other words, before the design, we'd have a program.
okay? So then after that, the other three are blank, so how do the other three compare?
Worthington is a new K through 8, it should be a high priority,
Yep.
highest priority.
Yep.
Okay? I have the highest probability, and what about
Probability, right?
probability?
This one, I think, is questionable because it's a substantial change from our current model.
Right.
So we might
I
need
would say low probability.
Low.
low probability?
Yep.
Yep.
And it might be also true of the pre-K.
And that really is ugly, because the second high school is the.
Okay. So I have those all in there for now. Okay. So I think that at this stage, you guys have filled these in, and then what you'll do is fill in, those different ones, but then we're going to have to sort of figure out, in what kind of environment are we going to put in the gradation, right? So if you put, let's say, for example, 100 to one of the criteria, and there's low, medium, and high. So how would you define the, the gradation from that point? Maybe it's appropriate for another meeting, I'm not sure, but, as you can tell, it's going
Or I might ask
to.
a small group to help me do that.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save it at this point. I'm going to copy and give you guys a copy of it, and then this part will then commence my portion of the meeting.
Bravo, Cynthia.
Wow,
Thank you very much.
Can I get a USB stick and I can pass it to somebody now? I might have one.
Oh, I might.
I might.
Might have taken it out, but it might still be in here.
Great, thank you. I'm just gonna give you the file, and then. It's not a big file. It's not, okay, all right.
Where'd that come from, Alan?
Which one? the-
Option J.
Option J is the K.
K.
K through 6.
Yeah.
Wait, which one?
It,
It sort of came out of the blue.
yeah, actually Betsy talked to me about it this weekend.
I didn't talk to you about it. You told me about K through 6.
Oh, I did?
Yes.
No, he's talking about the K pre-K, or which one?
The beep K.
Okay.
The multi-site.
Pre-K is because there were preliminary discussions going on between Wheelock, Pine Manor, and the Brookline Public Schools until Pine Manor's president left. And there were possibilities for an early ed center at Pine Manor and a collaborative project between Wheelock and Pine Manor and the town to provide, let's call it lab schools for early education programs at Pine Manor and Wheelock. And to the extent that those could be revisited, then it's at
Okay.
least worth
I think it should be
considering.
fine.
Oh, that's great. That's very
That's fine,
interesting.
but then either I misunderstood or was misinformed, because somebody said to me, what we're talking about is acquiring multiple sites in
The
each
thought,
district.
because right now, we are already, the pre-K programs are already out of the K through 8 schools. They've
Yeah.
been removed. They
Yeah.
are at multi-sites.
I know that, yeah.
Those sites, some of them have additional space, some don't. But at the moment, there are at least 3. If you added a 4th, then you would wind up with perhaps 4
Okay.
early
All right,
ed
I
centers
heard it
that would
different.
serve the whole town.
Excuse me, we can't hear out here. Are you in recess?
Yes,
We're in recess?
well, until we pick up the next component. What did I do now?
What we're talking about is option J, and trying to get a clarification as to what it is, because some of us aren't familiar with it.
And that was BEEP and putting BEEP or pre-K and K in multiple centers around town, taking them out of the schools. And there was a conversation, I'm just repeating what Betsy told me, there was a conversation with Pine Manor and Wheelock College at one point about setting up a pre-K and K center at Pine Manor, which would have been one of those sort of nodes for pre-K education. But that hasn't really, that conversation really hasn't advanced very far. But that was the genesis of that option. That's what we were just discussing.
Thank you. Okay, the next, where is this? The next agenda item is to discuss the balance of the summer schedule.
Can we turn the lights up at this point? Do we have any more?
So, Ken, can you pass those around, please? Actually, here's some more. Sorry.
Alan,
So,
do you want to send this around?
that's not, we're going to do the,
Okay,
I have listed the summer schedule first.
okay, all right.
So let me just say a few words about the draft timetable that's being sent around. The school committee was concerned that it wasn't going to have a lot of time with the delivery at the end of August of our recommendations. So I've tried to set out a timetable where the delivery of our report to the school committee might be as early as the 13th of August, or to give us a little wiggle room, as late as Friday, the 16th. It's a very compressed timetable, and what the idea was that we could actually, as we have a number of sections, and I'm going to show you George's outline with some adjustments in a minute. We have another number of sections that I believe we could draft now that are not recommendation. So I call them the non-recommendation sections. And what I'd like to do when we get there is to see if we can spread out the responsibility for doing some of those drafts. For example, at the last meeting, Michael said he would do the financial, probably along with Sean and Peter.
Yeah, definitely along with Sean and Peter.
Right. So here is the schedule, and it shows, as we already talked about, a meeting on Monday, July 29th. And then it shows a meeting a week after, also on the 5th of August. And then another one on the 12th of August, also on Monday. And if necessary, one on the 14th after we had delivered the report. But we may be able to deliver the report earlier than that. So that, I've just picked out the B-Space meeting dates to show you. And then in between, we have to meet some deadlines so that we can get you those sections, those non-recommendation sections, get them to you so at the following meeting, you can tell us what changes you think we ought to make. So that we can turn it those sections into a final report well before we make the recommendations itself. Is that clear? Let's go, Michael.
Right, the only the only problem here is that we won't have the report from the consultants until the 25th.
That's right.
But we presume
I'm assuming they will be here to talk to us on the 29th.
Okay.
And I'm
There's
hoping,
there's certainly some things we can do, drafting, well, I'm thinking about the finances.
Yeah.
It'd be better if we had the report, but, okay.
right. And what I'm hoping, and I'm just not sure about this, is whether, if they're going to report to us on the 29th, that on the 24th, when I understand the report is going to be available, we can have that report delivered electronically to each one of you, so that when they come to report, you'll be in a position to actually ask them questions, rather than to absorb the information for the first time.
So, do you see us voting on a recommendation on when?
5th, August 5th.
Right, where it says on the left-hand side, under action, the last bulleted item, review and comment on first draft of recommendations. See what that is?
Assuming that at that point, we have nailed down the specifics sufficiently.
So, on the 29th, we're discussing our final recommendations and assigning the writing of it.
What I'm assuming there, and it is an assumption, is that we will all be able to see the report shortly after the 24th. Then they will make the presentation on the 29th, and while we won't be in a position to make any recommendations, after they have made the presentation and answered some of our questions, we could then discuss informally where we think we're going in terms of the recommendations.
On that night.
On that night, yes. Just as a preliminary discussion, not to draw any conclusions, but to see where people are, what ideas they have.
Will we have something back from discussions with BU that gives us some kind of indication?
Yes, I think, Ken, is that fair? Yes, we'll have something. We don't know what that something will be, but it will either be more or less
How about
definitive.
more information than we have now?
Because that is another important.
I agree. Right, but that meeting is tomorrow, Wednesday. It's
Wednesday.
This coming Wednesday, 2 days from today.
Okay. All right, so as you say, we'll know more. We may know that we don't know, but.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. In which case we have to
And
make a
that would
recommendation.
indicate whether or not it's a viable pursuit or,
Plays into the site
Yeah.
availability question.
Yeah.
right.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So, but what I need to know is, as far as this is concerned, whether people think it's doable. I know that it places a substantial amount of pressure on a number of us, but the question is it doable? Or do you see anything that would lead you to say it's impossible?
And talking about the deadline, we really appreciate George Cole having organized an outline. And I'm thinking, Alan, it would help everybody if we distribute this now, because then they can see what the framework for this is.
Very good.
All right, so
Because that's the next agenda
this,
item.
but this is to help people, let's see if there's enough there, help people understand the report, what it encompasses. And I think what we're hoping is that we'd be able at least to do background information that is not necessarily specific to final recommendations, but which would outline the options that have been discussed by the committee, and at least, set out the original question, which is how many kids there are and all of the demographic information.
Let me just explain what the handout, okay? In red, first of all, so we had George's report as of May 24th. So what I did was I tried to adjust it based on what I knew had happened since then. And I made the adjustments, I showed the adjustments in red, so you can all see what those changes are. Some of them are just, for example, I tried to use the criteria that I thought we were going to end up with for the must tonight. for example, in number 3, and then again at the end. And I'll have to change those because we ended up with some different criteria.
But think of them as placeholders.
Yeah,
Getting back to the question, will we be ready on Monday, August 5th? Personally, I think that's ambitious. And I just throw that out, and if it's,
I don't think I would disagree with you on that. I think it's very ambitious.
I do too, because are we following,
safe,
are we
Michael.
following
That was
through on
pretty
Dr.
safe.
Child's
Well, I've
method
been
here? or
saying
not?
outrageous things all
yeah, I
night,
think
but
that I'm going to ask for, I'm going to ask for a small group to maybe put the evaluations that we just did into numbers, and then I'll ask her to do the calculations.
I mean, we haven't done the last step of Dr. Child's method where the cost factor comes in too.
Right.
It's like,
That's
you know,
right.
It's like seems like we're a long way from finishing what we made a big step forward on
That's
tonight,
right.
But
That's right, and
that
that's
and
got to,
finish a report by.
well, that's got to be done in the next couple, that's got to be done before the 29th.
yeah, right. Right.
And you're right, Ken, I don't have that process in there, so I'll have to add that process. You're absolutely right.
How disastrous is it if we say we'll come to our conclusion on the 12th rather than the 5th? And if we're coming to a conclusion on the 5th, why are we meeting on the 12th?
Let me just look it over again.
Well, I think the idea, frankly, was to approve the,
On the 5th, what it says is review and comment on the first draft of recommendations, okay? So then we would have to revise that draft based on those recommendations. So on the 9th, which is the Friday after the Monday, we would hopefully be sending out a draft which reflected the comments on the first draft, and then that would come back, then we would discuss that on the 12th. And make the final recommendations on the 12th, final comments
so
on the
the idea
recommendations on
is
the 12th.
the committee would meet on the 29th, and then again on August 5th and the 12th, right? And maybe we skip the 12th and meet on the 14th if there's more, I don't know what Alan had in mind on that, but so,
Yeah, well, that's the wiggle room.
yeah,
I mean, it
a little
depends
bit of
on
wiggle room.
how far we are.
2 days of wiggle room, okay.
And in the meantime, just so you know, the Capital Improvement Committee of the school committee, which is going to have the lead responsibility for making its final decision, is going to meet just to talk about this schedule and how it can accelerate its examination so that it can come up with its final decisions well before the 12th, to make sure they get in on the 12th on time. So we'll be working with, and I'll meet with them each time, and so they will know what we're accomplishing, and they will be able to follow that and perhaps use that to start earlier.
Right, so there's, one thing that makes a great deal of sense is if the work that Sean and Peter and I do, and the work that they do are.
Tied.
Absolutely.
together.
Intimately.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. Okay, as long as that's understood, that's fine. We get the financial stuff, I mean, we can get the data organized by then.
Yeah,
We won't.
and then it's a matter of plugging it in depending on the recommendations.
Okay.
Or, any questions about the draft, timetable or the adjustments that I made to George's work? Okay.
So, Alan, do you have staff lined up to help actually assemble this? You know, when you get pieces of writing emailed to you and someone to put it in the format of.
No, but Betsy and I are going to talk about that, right? And you know, I mean, most of you know that the school committee support staff is not non-existent during the summer. So that's going to be an interesting challenge. We'll have to find some support. So if that's the case, what I wanted to do was to ask if there were some other people who thought they could take the responsibility for a section of the outline. And so I thought, seeing no hands shoot up,
Well, Mel had to leave, and so I've been proxied to volunteer him for either and/or the executive summary and/or the challenge and opportunity section. I would suggest the executive summary is the last thing you write.
yeah.
Right.
But,
I'm not sure that anybody can write that until we've got the rest of it done.
right,
Yeah.
so why don't you
But we
put,
could assign him to do that.
What were you going to say?
so put Mel down for challenge and opportunity.
Okay, so
And he's
just,
not here to defend himself.
right. Just
The
bring me,
front, very front,
okay.
number 2.
Section 2.
Oh, section 2, okay. So then I thought that I would try number 3.
Mike's 4.
And Michael's 4. And I wondered, Phil and Neil, whether together you thought you could do number 5.
Do we have the, 5 will be based upon the HMFH report, right?
To a large extent,
Sure.
it will, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
You should be able to plagiarize the whole thing.
Yeah, use their graphics, everything.
There you go.
You shouldn't have to write.
We pay for
Okay.
it.
And Betsy and I thought that we'd probably have to deal with number 6.
Number 5, high school, other, high school being covered by. Okay. Okay, no, sorry.
There was discussion about having a K through 8 at the high school.
We also have to deal with the high school.
Right, you have to go over the HMFH
Right,
expansion
right,
options
Right,
for the high school.
exactly.
If you wanted to carve that out, if you wanted to take everything but that, George, would you do the high school, could you?
I am fortunately am leaving for a long vacation next Monday and we'll be
Okay.
back for 2 weeks, so
Okay.
this fits perfectly in my schedule. Perfectly.
Oh, yeah, me too. Did I
Couldn't
say?
be better.
Ken?
I'll volunteer for the CBA part. I'll work with Cynthia.
Oh, good for you.
Great.
Thank you.
So that's number 7, right?
Yep.
Right.
Who gets to write number 8?
Rebecca's not here.
Oh, Rebecca.
Well, I thought actually that Rebecca's not here. She's, she's,
No, George can do it when he comes back.
No, no.
I thought that Betsy and I would also probably have to end up doing the recommendations, and then I thought that, knowing Rebecca's skills, that I would ask her, since there would be a variety of people and styles, because we're doing sections, that I would ask Rebecca to take a look at the whole thing and kind of pull it together. And Lisa, I wondered if by any chance you would help her do that. Would that be okay? That would be really great.
And Alan, at the end, if you want me to do the executive summary, I can put that together at the end.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
Spain.
I think that's it.
I think that's it then, thank you very much. I also, sorry Mel's not here, the town paid for our dinner tonight. And I want to thank the town publicly for that. And I also want to announce that in light of that, the school system has agreed to pay for our dinner on the 29th.
You're gonna miss it.
I know.
You're gonna miss the.
Chris Keller.
Hi, Chris.
Introduce myself.
Nice to see you. Thank you for some of the comments that you made.
No worries about butchering the name.
Oh,
All of us
I
who came
really,
from the old Emerald Island.
you know, I just felt sick to my stomach when I saw that because it represented a clear